What was it like on your first night as a homeless person? I was about 9 years old and my mum said we were going on a camping trip. I didn't really suspect anything as it was summertime and we went camping a lot when I was younger, although I did wonder why we were packing so much stuff. After a few weeks of camping, I started to complain, but my mum insisted that it was good for us to get in touch with nature, stuff like that. Then school started and we were still camping, and we kept camping for another 6 months. When we finally got a house, my mum cried with joy. And we don't camp anymore. To me, that reads as your mother trying to protect you as best as she could and keep things positive for you, staying strong in the face of terrible circumstances. Good for her. I remember being really hungry and acting weird because of the low blood sugar, almost delirious. This was when I made a futile attempt to run away from an awful home situation with no money. I ended up going back because of that. I was 13 when my parents kicked me out and told me that they no longer wanted anything to do with me. I was terrified to visit a shelter because I'd known some foster kids and the whole system scared me, plus I wanted to continue going to the same school. I didn't want to lose my friends either. The scariest part at that age was really just finding out what I was hoping to eat. There had been a dilapidated trailer just minutes down the road from my dad's place, so I stayed in that. I don't think it really hit me until I had to choose one night between food and blankets because the temperature was expected to drop down into the mid-30s, and I only had one somewhat thin blanket at that point. The next day I put on my best attire, which was nothing impressive, and asked for a job at Long John Silver's. I lied and told them I was 15 and I worked 5 days a week rushing over after school. I ate more unhealthy than I have since to save money for some form of shelter, which came in the form of a 91 Toyota Camry that I purchased out of the thrifty nickel for $300. I loved that clunker, plus heating myself was much easier in it. From there, it was mostly uphill. I found an older lady willing to rent me her garage without any sort of credit check. Took a couch off the side of the road to sleep on. I even had internet in there where I mostly read scary stories all night. I wish video streaming services had been a thing back then. I just kinda learned to roll with the punches. My childhood wasn't normal. It was downright terrifying a good chunk of the time, but it is what made me who I am today. I don't know that I could deal with that situation now as a grown man. It's downright impressive that you managed to survive, but also progressively better your situation. Well done. Also, the fact that it's implied that you finished school like this is a whole extra level of wow. I was homeless for a couple of months a year or so ago. I had a car and a low-paying job, so I lived in the woods in a tent for a bit. The first night was miserable. I ended up sleeping really uncomfortably in the passenger seat of my car, and it was a really cold night. After that, I got a tent and slept on an old climbing pad I had. The first night was hell, but the next several weeks were actually not so bad. I had a spot in the woods where I was well hidden and I could cook over a fire. I really didn't have it that bad, but it gave me quite a bit of sympathy for people who really do end up on the streets in much more desperate situations. Stuff is not easy. I was only homeless for about 6 weeks at 36 years of age. After several years of depression and anxiety slowly eroding my resources, relationships, and general will to try anymore, I ended up having a final blowout with my girlfriend, who reasonably couldn't handle me anymore. I started sleeping at work, which wasn't even a full-time job. The delicate part was not getting caught, and the freedom from the extremely unhealthy state my relationship had been in kept my mind away from the absolute abject terror that was hiding beneath the surface. The scary part of homelessness for me was the growing sense that if I fell any further, I'd probably never get back up. It takes resources to be clean, fed, and rested, and if you aren't those things, it's very hard to get the resources, let alone find the will to try. But that first night was all triage, all focused on trying to be sure the second night wasn't going to be on the street. I pulled it off for 6 weeks, and that time actually saved my life. I was away from conflict, intimately connected to how dire my circumstances had become, and forced into a very regular schedule. Routine is really good for me, but nigh impossible in a depressive state. I was without bills, was able to save enough for a damage deposit and rent. I still struggle with depression in a pretty serious way, but the animal terror of having nowhere and no one really seared itself into me. A better motivation would be the future I want rather than the future I fear. But as it stands, I at least have a motivator strong enough to escape the incredible gravity of mental illness. Sleeping in my car wasn't that bad. It was summer, so it was pretty warm, which was my biggest issue. I showered in the gym, spent most of my day at the library before going to work. For the first few nights, it wasn't bad. However, one night, police found me sleeping in my car and escorted me to the local homeless shelter, which was one of the most terrifying nights of my life. While I was there laying in a bunk bed, a huge argument broke out because one guy broke out some crystal. wouldn't share it with a second guy, and then a third guy got angry and started screaming at them to be quiet because he needed to sleep. Since this is coming up a lot, people keep asking how it was legal that the police escorted me to the shelter. I don't know the legality of the issue. What I can say is I was woken up by a knock on my window to see 4 cops, 2 cop cars, and they were shining those super bright flashlights through my windows at me, and I didn't even think of arguing with them. When you're a teenager, it seems kind of cool to sleep in a car, on the couch or floor of a friend or acquaintance, or for your dad to scam a rented apartment for a month or 2 without paying for it. Moving around every few months, carrying everything you can in an old Honda Civic, seemed like an adventure. We once moved a couch across town in it. We must have looked like a couple of idiots. Once, after a few months of staying in a place where we had no furniture, were sleeping on the floor, the carpet of which was so flea-infested you could literally see the fleas hopping around, the landlord got so frustrated with us basically squatting in his property that my dad had promised to pay and never did, that the landlord removed the front door. We went out to scam some food from somewhere and came back to find no front door, which in retrospect is a pretty awesome way to get someone out of your property. One of the ways we scammed food would be to go to the breakfast buffet at a fancy hotel, tell the server we had a room there, eat a ton of food and just walk out. If you go to a basic place like a Motel 6 with the waffle maker and everything, and no one's working there besides someone at the front desk and someone coming around cleaning, it's pretty easy. But do remember that you're stealing and you can get in trouble for it. This was also kind of fun, but looking back, it is kind of a messed up way for a dad to treat his teenage kid. Slept in my vehicle, couch surfed with a friend, squatted in an unused trailer, all while still working at Walmart. Saved enough to get a crappy apartment and just kept going from there. First night, my wife and I ended up sleeping outside. We slept in a local park that I knew about. We'd come down from the countryside with a few rands, enough for a meal maybe, and hoped to stay with a friend. He was unable to give us a place to stay, so we had to sleep outside. After the insecurity of that first night, I told my wife that we had to find a safer place to sleep, so we climbed up the slopes of Table Mountain, about a 1-hour walk away, and found an obscured spot amongst some bushes and trees. We cleared that out with sticks and rocks, made it a bit habitable, and then went to the city looking for work. We'd spend the day going from one place to the next, looking for work until it started growing dark. Then we'd head up the mountain to our little spot for the night. Did that daily for a month until we were able to secure a small shack room in the townships, where we stayed for another few months until I got a job offer. It was my wife's temp waitering jobs that kept us fed while I was looking for work. Biggest challenge was mental, keeping focused, clean, looking presentable, and just making my job to be looking for a job. There have been times in my life where I've struggled to find literally any job from the comfort of my little apartment with working hot water and electricity for months on end. I do not know how you did this from your car or tent, and hats off to you for your relationship surviving this. Clearly a testament to your strength as a couple. I slept in a near-empty garage block, put blankets over my front and rear seats like a tent, and had a duvet to keep me warm. I was absolutely fine until I woke up in the morning and had a wee behind my car, and noticed the white van next to me had an electric plug in it. Someone was sleeping in the van. I slept there a few more times, kinda creepy, but it also kinda made me feel safer too. It was terrifying and cold and hungry. I didn't sleep a wink, I adapted over time. Extremely steep learning curve to surviving homelessness, nothing really prepares you for it. It wasn't awful until it sunk in that it wasn't going to change anytime soon. At first it's just shocking, like blank mind shocking. How did I get to this point? Then it's scary and surreal. And I had my kid with me, so I was busy keeping him safe and fed. Awful came about a month into it. And yes, we have an apartment now and all is well, thank you. I kept waking up in the middle of the night and I'd start walking home. I'd get a few steps and then stop and realize I had nowhere to go and turn back and walk over and lay on the ground. The ground is very cold and I felt a lot of shame. When I was a teenager, I had lots of problems with my mum. I pretty much chose to be homeless. I slept at a Catholic church across from my high school so I could still make it to school and graduate early. I remember really feeling sad because I slept where they put people's ashes, and I remember being so sad that those people could comfort me in death more than anybody alive. I used to talk to them. If there's camera footage, I think I'd look insane on it. I never realized how alone I was in the world until I was homeless. And I never realized how cold concrete can be. It chills you right to your bones and is painful. I started being homeless at 19. A previous foster parent put me out for coming home from college one night, and I'd called up a friend last minute. When I started to realize I wouldn't be able to crash or stay anywhere, I'm fairly certain I started to dread and spiral into a constant underlying depressive state. All I could think about was, am I going to die like this? Do I matter? Will no one help me? I'm sad. I'm scared. I don't want to feel like I have to beg. What if I'm stuck like this? Is this really my life right now? 19 through 26 was a very challenging time. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I didn't really realize what was going on. I was about 6 or 7 at the time. Dad said we were just going to go for a drive and to throw my backpack with all the clothes I could fit and one toy. Mum was just crying. Me and my brother sat in the back seat. He was a bit older and was holding our Sega Genesis and looking scared. We drove for a little while. It was already getting dark, and we parked in front of a Walmart, and Dad said he had to rest for a while. It was the first of many, many nights we slept in the car. I remember one of my parents was always awake, with their hands in their coat pocket. Looking back, it was obvious they had a weapon for protection and were sleeping in shifts. I was getting high, so it didn't really sink in until I was broke and dope sick. Then the desperation started, going to gas stations, jumping car to car, asking for money, stealing what I had to. It was a miserable existence. There are so many things you don't think about when you're not homeless. Taking a shower, washing your clothes, and the boredom, hours upon hours of nothing to do, and the constant noise. There was nowhere to go where it was truly quiet. Fortunately, I eventually got arrested for shoplifting and reached out to family who helped me get back on my feet. I was once fooled by an ex into moving back in with her after a breakup. After a couple of weeks, she decided to have a yard sale. This yard sale ended up featuring most of my stuff. Then with money in hand, she decided it was time I went back to my place. My place which had nothing in it. My place which I'd given notice on. My place which was already awaiting a new renter. I spent my last 2 weeks sleeping on a hardwood floor using sweaters as blankets, and then when the day came to vacate, I threw all of my clothes in a plastic bag and just started walking. I was destitute. I had absolutely nothing and no idea where to start. It was right in the Canadian winter, so staying outside would be a death sentence in many cases. So I did the only thing I could think of. I sat in a 24-hour Tim Hortons. I used what little money I had to purchase small coffees once in a while, so I at least had an excuse to sit there. Eventually my cash ran out and I thought for sure I'd get the boot. Then one of the ladies working the counter came over and just handed me my usual order. I guess she probably figured out what was going on and felt bad. The second time she did it, I struggled not to cry. I'm pretty thankful because my next idea if I was asked to leave was to politely refuse and sit and wait for the cops. It would have been better than freezing to death. Morning came and I'd saved only enough to catch a single bus. I headed downtown to try and find some friends. I did, and I couch surfed between a lot of them. I never spent a night out in the cold, but I spent many in a coffee shop or bouncing between friends. It was the worst my depression ever got and the closest I ever came to just finishing things. My life is like a million times better now, but I'll never forget how worthless I felt. I'm just glad you made it through the other side. You really got the best and worst of people there. An ex who was either purposefully destroying your life or just making a ploy to get some cash, and then strangers and friends who extended you little kindnesses until you got back on your feet. Well done. My parents didn't tell us that they lost their house to the bank. One day we left everything but a few clothes and essentials. I remember sitting in the car, watching the world outside, and I felt extremely alone. The drive just went on endlessly unless we had to go to the bathroom. We ate some cracker things and had water at rest stops from bathrooms. Sleeping in a car seat that you couldn't lay back on was really hard to adapt to, so I didn't sleep for the first couple of nights. It really sucked, but as the days turned into weeks, things just kind of became the new normal. We'd drive around for hours and sometimes camp out at campgrounds or roadsides instead of sleeping in our woefully tiny car. This completely ruined our education because we couldn't stay at any school long. I loved school for the food, and I'd steal paper, pens, and books sometimes, so I had something to do. My mother eventually said she'd just homeschool us, but that was soon dropped for us kids to do for ourselves. I was able to almost get my GED before a sickness stopped me, but some of my younger siblings only have an education from 3rd or 4th grade. When it was winter, I remember having to take showers from those hand pumps at the camping ground. The water was so cold it would instantly burn and numb up from anything it touched. We also didn't have any winter clothes, so most of us would wrap up in our old blankets and layers of clothes. We rarely had any food, and I resorted to eating some of my clothes, paper, grass, or tiny pieces of my own skin to try to not feel hungry. Once we had pancakes as our main food for months. I cannot eat pancakes anymore because the very smell of them makes me sick now. Other food we got was ramen and rarely a hot dog. I'm not sure how my parents managed to get the food or even have money, even if it was very little. Maybe from a food pantry. Cooking food on the fire wasn't that hard to do, and I learned how to make a fire and gather what a fire needs. If we got sick, we never went to a doctor, just had to hope it got better. We were on and off homeless until I was in my late teens when my grandmother brought my parents a house for us all to live in. It feels so strange to actually have a home and even food. I still have a hard time knowing a lot of social norms because of the isolation from homelessness. You just do what you can to survive. I still resent my parents for avoiding any help from the government or going to any homeless shelters. They lost our house because of stupid spending and going into bankruptcy. Their habits never changed. We'd get a place to live for maybe a year or two, then lose it because my parents were terrible at managing money. I don't recall my very first time exactly. I do remember looking for a friend that was homeless, and his friends ended up watching over me. Everyone was drunk except me. I didn't sleep. More recently, less than a month ago, I lost my housing and everything I own. I'm alone this time. I sleep during the day and browse Reddit at night. I was homeless for 10 years the first time, and I am terrified now. I packed 3 bags, one with clothes, blankets, and a pillow, one with food and one with books. I couch surfed for a little bit, a week or 2 with each of my friends, slept in my car while I had it. I used other people's kitchens to cook stolen food and ate food that 7-Eleven threw away. Every morning at about 6 a.m, night shift would throw out all of the food that had sat too long. I'd wait for the clerk to go back inside and then fish the bag out of the dumpster. I slept outdoors in some parks after the car got towed, and I used my friend's goodwill. Got really good at 5 to 10 minute wash-ups in public bathrooms with hand soap. Teeth, armpits, under chest, and butt. Let me tell you how nasty hand soap tasted. I'd occasionally wash my underwear with hand soap real quick too, and dry it with the hand dryers. I'd generally use 2 24-hour McDonald's at about 4 a.m. so no one would walk in on me. What I'd do is panhandle outside a subway station for enough money for a smack rock, an egg of blow, a syringe, a sandwich, and tea. If you wear semi-professional clothes and say, "Oh my god, my purse got stolen, does anyone have any spare change?" you get more money than just asking and wearing, like, jeans. I'd then go to McDonald's, order the sandwich, and say I had to use the bathroom. Then I'd do a wash-up, grab the sandwich, and eat it on the way to the next McDonald's. At the second McDonald's, I'd order a tea and ask for lemon juice, pocket the juice, and ask to use the restroom. In the restroom, I'd use the juice to break down the smack, mix it with the blow, and shoot up. Then, sadly, I'd usually actually use the bathroom in a park or something. Did this for years until I accidentally got pregnant. I'd be gosh darned if I screwed up my kid by being a junkie, so I cold turkeyed everything. I own a house now, and I'll be 14 years clean on November 18th. My ex-wife made up a bunch of crap to get a restraining order. I got served at work while she simultaneously shut off my phone service and locked me out of our shared bank account. This was January 7th, 2016. I had a t-shirt and slacks to wear for clothes and nowhere to sleep. My car didn't have working heat. Thank God for my parents who got me a hotel, new phone, and some money for clothes. I ended up living in an extended stay hotel for 2 months while I looked for an apartment and got my affairs in order. The restraining order was dismissed, the divorce went to trial, and I got the house and the kids. Well, that must have sucked for your ex-wife, but yeah, when you lie to get your way and presumably end up in contempt of court, things don't tend to go your way when evidence starts going up. And then, how much mercy can you really expect from the man you've basically made homeless for a while? I lived at school until I dropped out due to a bunch of personal reasons piling up. My mum was mad that I dropped out and wouldn't even talk to me the first few days after, and my relationship with my father is complicated or non-existent. I took the train to my hometown, even though I didn't know what I'd do or where I'd go when I got there. I ended up staying the first night in my brother's room, not quite an apartment, just the one room with a kitchen and bathroom he shares with like 5 other people. After that, I posted to social media that I was in an unfortunate situation, and a friend I'd lost touch with, despite once being very close, offered that I could stay with him and his fiancée until I got a place of my own. I never actually had to sleep outside, and I found an apartment after about a month, so all in all, I was pretty lucky with how it turned out. Oh, and my mum and I are cool now, and my dad and I are also trying to rebuild our relationship after he finally divorced his no longer new wife. I've always referred to her as his new wife, even though it's been over a decade. I was homeless for a little while in the 80s. It's terrifying at first. You feel so unsafe. I was a teenager, and I wasn't willing to close my eyes and sleep on a park bench alone. So I went to a local shelter and lied about my age. They forced me to shower and do a pee test. It turns out the women in that shelter were scarier than the street, so the next night I didn't go back. I slept in a park, but ultimately made squatter friends and stayed with them. It was very much a community, and I felt safe and even loved there. The biggest problem with being homeless in the city is no one wants to let you use the bathroom. Even park bathrooms are locked. Squat peeing in between cars can be done quickly and undercover, but when you get your time of the month, it's a nightmare. These days I have stability, so I never pass a homeless person without buying them some food or giving them a bit of money. And if they use it for substances or booze, I honestly don't care. Living on the street is hard. Drink if you need to, my friend.
Medical professionals of Reddit, what is the worst hookup-related injury you've seen at your workplace? Exotic special ordered venomous spider placed where the sun don't shine. Guy called an ambulance because he wasn't sure if he could put bug bite cream up there. As the packaging said, for external use only. Lost entire traverse section of necrotic bowel. They lived, but they poop in a bag now. At first I thought, how crazy do you have to be to do that? But then I instantly thought, I'm gonna be sus of people that like spiders from now on. Mini lava lamp stuck in the rectum. Power cord was sticking out like a tail. Mini lava lamp stuck in a rectum? Sounds like a Card Against Humanity's card. Did you try unplugging it and then plugging it back in? Broken pee-pee. Dude's testes were the size of grapefruits. I assumed the internal artery was pumping blood into them from somewhere. Wasn't MA then, now in med school. It was a neat injury, but nothing we could do for him at the urgent care. He needed surgery for sure. Did see a bottle stuck up in a bum x-ray as well. I'm not one to judge. Keep on freaking on. But don't put glass up your bum, please. Anyone who's had the misfortune of watching One Man, One Jar in the mid-2000s knows better. Childhood memory unlocked. Countless cases of stuff stuck you know where. Pee-pee sticks, lady toys, cucumbers, toilet bowl brushes. If it's possible to get it in there, then someone's needed it surgically removed. Toilet bowl brush was the most shocking. However, the funniest was reconstructing a giant white, oddly realistic, veiny looking pee-pee on the back table to make sure they had pulled it all out. Pro tip, if you get something stuck up there, don't make up some fantastical story about unclothed light bulb changing. We know how it got there. You know how it got there. There's no shame in liking that stuff. Just tell us your personal time went awry. It would be kind of funny if a doctor did believe those wild stories and then was like, man, I never thought that could happen. I used to work weekend night shifts. Had a young girl come in one weekend. Despite her age, she had a hip replacement and it was dislocated. ER put it back in and she went on her way. Next weekend, she's back again. Same thing. Third weekend in a row, and there she is. Finally, I ask what she's doing to dislocate her hip so much, and she says her boyfriend keeps bending her leg back too far while they hook up. I told her to try different positions. Talk about not caring about your partner's well-being. Dude stuck a pencil up his urethra. What is porous? It got stuck. For a day. He couldn't pee around it, and initially, that's what his complaint was, urinary retention. Finally, in the exam room, when the doc asked him what the freak, with the eraser sticking out of his pee-pee, the guy finally fessed up. He ended up needing surgery. He was also like 70 years old enough to know better. Damn, in his 70s and still being a freak? You go, Grandpa. Uncle-in-law, who's an anesthesiologist, had a patient come in that had poured concrete in his bum while trying to make a custom pee-pee stick. They had to chisel the concrete out of his bum. Excuse me, he did what now? Back in medical school, I was on a surgery rotation with a classmate. Our first day, we got split into groups. By chance, my first case was an appendectomy. His first case was helping deliver a jewel-encrusted pee-pee stick from the bum of a 250-pound guy. He was at the business end when it crowned and was responsible for catching as the surgeon pushed from above. Gives a new meaning to the terms pitch and catch. Worked at a physical therapy clinic for years. 78-year-old man came in with a herniated disc in his neck after satisfying his girlfriend. He was a longtime patient and friend of the therapist, so we got the whole story. Our patient, P, was old, rich, and single, and loved all the sleazy bits that came with it. One day, his 39-year-old girlfriend asked him to return the favor, so P goes to town for the first time ever at age 78. Not really knowing what he was doing, he went at her like a dog drinking water, his words. A few moments later, he felt a pop and his arm went numb. He came to us with a nearly useless left arm about 2 days later. My boss was laughing so hard during the eval that I went into the treatment room to check on him. P insisted I stay and hear the whole story. P died a couple months later from something unrelated. I miss that crusty old bastard a lot. Wait a minute, for the first time at 78, Mr. P? Come on now, don't be selfish like Mr. P, everyone. Also, he died a few months later. Anybody else kind of thinking it's a little suspicious? A janitor heated up petroleum jelly and injected it into his pee-pee with a syringe. He was trying to make it bigger. He kept adding more. Another janitor saw him and decided to do the same. So it turns out with nowhere to go, petroleum jelly forms granulomas under the skin, which gets infected. Word was the tip of his thing and the base wouldn't work anymore, only the middle, and abscesses formed, resulting in what was described as the pee-pee looking like, and you might want to brace yourself for this, maggots had burrowed tunnels through it. Janitor 1 was hospitalized for several weeks. As for Janitor 2, he ended up with several ulcerating wounds in his pelvic region. You could stick a finger in them. They were that big. Apparently injecting your thing with petroleum jelly is fairly common. Some girls have also attempted to inject this in their chesticles to give themselves implants. It has led to deaths because bits and pieces of it can dislodge and travel to your lungs. First off, ew. Secondly, I think it's important to say that many people in the world are not happy with their bodies, so I would suggest therapy to get help with that issue. And after that, if you still want to improve your body, at least seek out a medical professional. Typically not a medical professional, but I have a friend who was a hospital pharmacist. He said a patient came in with a coffee thermos in his bum. Cap first. He got the rest of the thermos out, but the cap stayed. After a couple of days, he finally decided to go to the hospital because he couldn't get it out. The cap ended up festering bacteria, and he had to have part of his colon removed. Now the guy is in his 30s with a colostomy bag. I've seen a crystal clear imprint of a clothing iron to the bum. The thought process was something like, if candle wax equals kinky, iron equals mega kinky? I don't know. Also, a pair of junkies got wasted and shot a substance in one of the guy's members, and we had to fillet the whole thing. He was distraught about the size difference after. This is why you shouldn't do substances, kids. Makes your member smaller. I had a patient come into the ER with runs of VTAC, dangerous arrhythmia, because his boyfriend sprinkled substance powder on a pee-pee stick and used it on him. It's very absorbent up there, and suddenly your heart is crapping out at the rate of 220 beats per second. Kinda hookup related? On Andrews Air Force Base in the 1980s, a guy was caught doing bad things to a family member. As the cops arrived, he sat on the front concrete steps and hammered his junk off. My mom worked on him in the emergency room. He still ended up in jail. Well, at least he gave himself more justice than the court system would. 18-year-old kid had a cheap pee-pee stick break way up in his bum, was bleeding and needed surgery. In my state, you're not legally an adult until 19, so he had to call his mom for consent, and she demanded staying with him through his entire ER visit. If you want the details, it was probably 7 to 9 inches of plastic. Top 2 inches are what broke off. Also, yes, the medical consent rules are screwy. Applies to SA as well, unless the parent was the suspected assailant. Not my story, but my mom's. She used to work in the oncology department at her hospital a while back. One day she came home, sits me down and says, syphilis in the eye. You always make sure your partner is clean. Don't take their word for it. I don't care what you do, just syphilis in the eye. That's all I needed to hear. Labia hematoma. Couple had hookup time, then got into a fight. He kicked her in the crotch. This bursted a blood vessel in the labia, which made it swell to the size of a large pear. That crap hurts. She used many colorful words to describe what she thought of him. My friend works at an ER in a small rural area in Canada. Apparently, this young guy comes in and has a can of Axe body spray stuck up his rectum. He was extremely embarrassed, and his excuse was that he accidentally sat on it. The crazy thing about this story is that I bet if the dude farted, you probably wouldn't be able to tell if it was him or the Axe body spray. A guy came into the emergency department because his bum hurt after his boyfriend, put his whole hand up there? He had torn his bowel and had to get a colostomy. It wasn't life-ending or anything, but imagine going to the ED after hooking up and getting told that you're getting a freaking colostomy. I had a woman in her 50s that had her boyfriend do the same thing, while they had recreationally taken muscle relaxers. She apparently was really into it and wanted him to be rougher with her. Then he pulled his arm out and noticed that there was blood everywhere. He called for an ambulance and she had a significant bowel tear. She had surgery and also got a colostomy, and several complications post-op and ended up on a ventilator long-term, unable to wean. Her grown children didn't know what caused it. The boyfriend was very attentive and stayed by her side. He was very nice, and I know he had to be dealing with some guilt. Eventually, her prognosis was so poor that they withdrew life support and she died. Every time I had conversations with her boyfriend, I noticed how huge his fists and forearms were. My dark sense of humor is telling me to make a joke, but in all seriousness, people do need to be more careful with what they take/use during hookup time. Nothing worse than pee-pee sticks, lady toys, and other objects stuck where the sun don't shine. One chap did say that he likes sticking things up there, and that's fair enough, but the strange excuses are usually the most entertaining part of it. Worst genital injury was some guy who drilled his junk with the cordless drill doing DIY. Don't secure your workpiece between your knees if you want to be sure to keep both testicles, gentlemen. I was actually reading an article about kink-friendly medicine today, and how much of a shame it is that there's so much stigma. All the kinksters agree that they should be open with their doctors, but most are not, and many will use urgent cares instead of their primary care due to reporting issues of judging by their practitioners. It causes real health issues. I'm still embarrassed about having to explain to my insurance that I both ran my car off an icy road and also got flogged so hard I had to stop because my spine hurt in the same week. So I couldn't really tell which one caused my back injury. They wanted to send it to my car insurance company. Oh, and they called during work hours, of course. I would have busted out laughing if I heard my coworker telling their insurance that they got their back blown out and needed to file a claim. Infected penile implant. His member looked like a purple tall boy beer can. They had to take him to the OR, literally filleted his man parts, take out the implant, and wash it all out. Worst part is they left him open for several days. Ick. I've actually read that men that get penile implants, it's not guaranteed that your junk works after. I think I'd rather have my stuff work than it looking better. But hey, to each their own. My mother worked in the ER and told me a story about a guy who was wasted on fairy dust and couldn't get it up. His friend told him to stick a chicken bone in his pee-pee and he would be able to hook up. He shoved the chicken bone in knuckle first and it shredded the tip of his pee-pee. A coworker was getting divorced. One night, his soon-to-be ex called about something and she could tell he was having a bad day. So to cheer him up, she had told him about how while she and her new boyfriend were hooking up, he shoved a pee-pee stick up her bum and it got stuck. After failed attempts to remove it, they went to the ER and she had to get surgery. After surgery, doctor sanitized it and gave it back to her. And in case you want to know, the story didn't make him feel better. How can any sane person think telling your ex about your new partner and you hooking up would ever be a good story to tell them? Does it count if I saw it prior to the doctor? Did some AV work for a friend of mine that managed a swing club. He was hooking up with some girl on this sort of rolling gurney / bed out in the middle of the lounge area, with like 50 plus people enjoying the show. They accidentally slid off the bed and in the jumble and ensuing thump to the ground, an audible pop was heard. He fractured his member. That pop that was heard was the poor guy's junk. Almost immediately it looked like a deflated purple balloon. This was many years ago now, and you can rest assured that I never let old broken pee-pee forget. Hey, what are best friends for, right? My family is constantly in and out of the local ER. Last time I went there for a concussion, there was a man in there with his wife for heart palpitations during hookup time. He started having a slow heart attack while they were doing the deed, and they ended up admitting him. There was also a girl in there, wasted out of her mind, claiming she hooked up with multiple different guys, like 3 or 6, and had gotten pregnant from all of them. But then her friends had kidnapped her and had given her a particular brownie with stuff in it, but she didn't know what kind of stuff. And the brownie made her lose her baby, and now she was dying. According to the conversation the doctor kept having with her, she had come in 3 times in that month claiming she was pregnant and worried about her baby. Each time they tested and all the tests came back negative. She started her period and it caused her to insist that she had lost the multiple men's baby. And it was the fault of the brownie she had in San Diego 3 days ago. She started wailing when they gave her some meds to calm her down, claiming that they were killing her baby with injections, and that she would call up her friends who kidnapped her and force her to eat the deadly brownie as proof. I'm not sure what ended up happening to her and her apparent psychotic break, but I'm hoping that they got her some help because she was clearly out of it. Dentist here. In dental school, definitely saw a girl with an inflamed palate that was worried about an infection. Did some tests, nothing looked infectious. Faculty member pulls me aside and was like, yeah, that's a bruise from a certain type of action if you catch my drift. Might not be a major injury, but definitely memorable. We actually learned / saw this in oral pathology class. It can happen because of continuous trauma to the palate. Just like you get a bruise on your arm with continuous hits, even if they aren't too hard. I'd recommend swishing with a saltwater rinse a couple times a day for a few days to help with the swelling, and maybe take a break until it heals. I'm sure AV stars know all the best health tips for these types of injuries. Dissected vertebral artery from a mouth hookup. Essentially a big brain hemorrhage. Did not end well either. My mom is a secretary at a hospital, so she had heard a few stories. Apparently a person had come in with a carrot stuck up their bum. Says it got stuck up there because he fell on it while they were cooking without clothes. I'd like to take this moment to thank everyone in this thread for making sure my genitalia never works again. Was working an ER rotation at a major DC hospital while getting my EMT. I wasn't around at the onset, but a gentleman came in complaining of swelling down there, and a nurse gave him a cursory look. She immediately took him into a private room, closed the door, and came over to tell us what was going on. The guy apparently liked to feel weight on his junk when he had personal time. He had put his junk through the center of a 5-pound weight plate, like you would when you do free weights. He did his business and then fell asleep. 5 hours later, he woke up swollen and unable to pull himself out of the weight. So he had somehow taken public transportation, or walked, with the 5-pound weight plate in his pants all the way to the hospital. We spent the next 30 minutes trying to reduce the swelling by putting crushed ice up against him without success. Finally, the charge nurse just called the DC Fire and EMS to get assistance with a heavy rescue squad to cut through the plate. We took the guy into the psych room, closed the door, and proceeded to cut it off. It being the weight, not his manhood. The entire time having to keep applying more ice to the plate so that it wouldn't become hot enough to cauterize his groin. The other patients really didn't appreciate hearing a buzzsaw, screaming, and seeing all of the ER staff giggling. Of course, the poor guy also had to deal with the constant stream of doctors, nurses, and techs having to go in there to check on something and see what was going on. I think this guy misunderstood how to get swole. My stepdad is an ER doctor in the only hospital in the city I was raised in. There was no place else to go when the hookup swing my idiot boyfriend hung on the drywall ceiling came crashing down and broke my tailbone. He was also there 6 months later when the same idiot boyfriend let go of my hips as I was visiting this town called Pound and was sent over the edge of a bed and headfirst into a desk. Sorry, Dad. Either this couple is really clumsy or they have an injury kink. We get inmates at my hospital because they're right down the road. They like to inflict injuries upon themselves to get out and spend a day here. The best from the inmates was a guy stuck a razor blade up his urethra, then proceeded to shove it up further with the pen. The pen put a hole in his urethra, and of course the razor shredded it. I think I'm gonna throw up after hearing that story. So I have a patient who came in due to a rash on his pee-pee. When asking about what caused the rash, he states, "I had a really rough hookup." Like really rough. I just nod my head and inform the doctor. We both give each other a what the freak look, and she proceeds to speak with the patient. The patient told her the true reason why he has the rash, and it was because he dry humped his girlfriend so roughly that he basically gave himself carpet burn on his pee-pee from his pants. No one ever talks about the dangers of the dry hump. Had this poor girl come into the ER a few weeks ago. Simple hookup went wrong case. And she was basically bleeding from her hoo-ha. They think she had some weak arteries down there and one must have just ruptured. Full disclosure, this happened to me. I noticed a small amount of bleeding immediately after. Later I noticed more, about the amount of menstruation. I laid a towel down and decided to go to bed. I felt a rush of fluid and made it to the bathroom before feeling faint and hitting the floor. I was able to call an ambulance from the floor. In the ambulance they said my face lips were blue from the loss of blood. One quick emergency surgery later and I was all stitched up and on my way home. Apparently I have weak arteries, which started as a small tear, broke open. So way back in medical school, all of us had to do 2 months rotation in an OBGYN. This rotation was split up into a few weeks of labor ward, a couple weeks of gynecologic surgery, and a couple weeks of OBGYN ER. Our major county hospital had a small, separate ER just for pregnant women and those with purely gynecological complaints, to relieve some pressure off the medical and surgical ERs. So I'm sitting in the OBGYN ER with the residents one night, and about 2 a.m. we get an ambulance crew bringing in a youngish woman who is absolutely howling in pain and tell me to get a quick report from the EMTs, who had already talked to both the woman and her boyfriend, who they said would not be coming to the ER because he was busy talking to the police. Per the EMTs, the woman and her boyfriend had just been at her house hooking up. They had just finished their business and, as folks are meant to do, decided to light up a certain type of pipe and share it while they were unclothed on their couch. The boyfriend apparently went out to their car to grab grab something and inadvertently bumped the headlight switch. This caused the lights to flash, which the woman apparently interpreted as "the cops are coming" for some reason, and shoved the lit pipe into her hoo-ha. Obviously, this was excruciatingly painful, causing her to tense up and start frailing trying to get it out, which then caused parts of it to shatter, so now she had hot broken glass in her baby maker. I don't have a hoo-ha personally, but that story made my imaginary hoo-ha hurt. I'm a firefighter/paramedic. Broken pee-pee, bent at a right angle about halfway. It's the second time he had it. His wife was on top and got carried away. It looked like they sacrificed a chicken on the bed. Not my call, but a paramedic was called to a 20-something male living in a ski resort town having groin pains. Arrived to find his pee-pee completely necrotic. His buddies had bet him that he couldn't stick it in a snowman for an hour. Perfect example of winning the battle, but losing the war. 26-year-old decided to be circumcised. His doctor told him not to hook up. He didn't listen. It peeled like a banana. Yep, that does it. I've had enough internet for the day after reading this.
People who have met their online friends, what made you instantly regret it? Met my best friend at the time on League of Legends. After talking every day for 3 years, I ended up moving to a state much closer to him, so we decided to finally meet. We talked about all the things we'd do together and how awesome it would be. I loved him so much. He was there for me through so much and was a wonderful friend. He had a new girlfriend at the time of our meetup and he brought her along with him. I had no problem with this because I'd love to meet the woman who makes him happy. It was abundantly clear from the get-go that she wasn't a real big fan of me. I did my best to be kind and still had tons of fun. I didn't hear from my friend much after that. A mutual good friend of ours messaged me, and when I asked about my best friend, they said his girlfriend was telling people that I was basically an awful person for whatever reason. 3 years later and he's engaged to this woman, and I'm happy for him, but I haven't spoken to him in those 3 years. I still miss him every day, and I wish I could be there for him on his wedding day. Not instant regret, but did make me realize things could have gone badly if this friend hadn't been a good human. There was a guy I used to play Halo 2 with all the time. We were playing Halo one day and I made some off-the-wall comment about how bad traffic was due to them redoing one of our local roads. He said his town was redoing a lot of roads too. I think I had a friend over or coming over and I forgot to mute my mic and said the road he lived on, asking when he had to leave to come over. Anyways, my Xbox buddy was like, "Holy crap, do you live in XYZ?" And I told him, yeah. Turns out he lived like 5 miles away from me on the other side of town. We ended up meeting up and I was about 11 or 12 at the time. He was like 17. And he went and bought me a burger and milkshake and we chatted. Pretty cool dude from what I remember. But when I got home that night, I thought about how different that could have been if he wasn't just some high schooler trying to make a kid's night with a burger and shake. My brother met a girl in person that he'd known for 4 or 5 years online, during which time they kind of had an online relationship. She had brought her friend with her to meet him, and while they were sitting around a table awkwardly making conversation, with my brother apparently quite shocked at how bad she looked in person compared to how she looked online, and having absolutely no interest in her other than his friends, the girl sent her friend a message saying, "Oh my god, get me out of here, he's looking at me like he wants to jump me." But she accidentally sent it to my brother. What ensued was likely incredibly painful to be a part of. My brother showed her his phone and looked at her in disgust. Met a girl I really liked on World of Warcraft, but she lived in another country. After a couple of vacations there, it turned into a relationship. I made the decision to move and start a new life there with her. After living there for 4 months, I slowly realized she was crazy as hell. Huge mood swings paired with a lot of aggression. I ended up getting stabbed in the side by her while asleep. Needless to say, after getting out of the hospital, I took the first plane back home. She's still in a psychiatric hospital. I have a weird story about a lesbian I met online and eventually IRL. For reference, I'm a bi girl. We started talking after I made a comment on a lesbian forum about being a single lesbian mom. I still didn't know if I was bi or lesbian at the time. We started messaging a lot, hundreds of texts a day. This included some sexy messages and pictures too. But she was always obsessed with my daughter, like almost demanding pictures of her and updates on her. Eventually, we arranged to meet up. When we finally see each other in person, she looks shocked and asks where my daughter was. I said she was being babysat by my mom so we can have a date. I could tell this threw her off a little bit. After our date, we start hooking up at my place. Even then, she was still asking about her. "After this, can I meet her? Will you let me babysit? Do you think she'll start calling me mommy?" I was like, chill, she's 1.5. This, combined with her being obsessed with my daughter's stuff, including stealing a pacifier, a dirty onesie, and going through the diaper pail, I decided this lady's crazy. She ended up stalking me for a while, but I was moving back in with my mom anyway, so I managed to escape. I was 13 and had a 20-year-old pen pal in Hong Kong, both of us female. We met on Tumblr and emailed each other regularly. My parents were CC'd in all of our correspondence, and we basically just talked about our cultures. About a year of us talking went by, and she said that her university allowed her to study abroad in Europe for a semester, and she chose my country. Fun! I was excited! However, some time went by and our friendship kind of faded, to the point where I had forgotten she was even coming to my country. About 2 weeks before she was supposed to come, she emailed me that her student accommodation had to be cleaned out, so she couldn't access it on the night she arrived. She needed a place to stay for one night. I asked my mom and she agreed to pick her up from the airport with me and that she could stay with us for one night. I mean, we trusted this girl. I was very open about my friendship with her. We had pictures and everything. So 2 weeks later, we pick her up from the airport, and we didn't click. She kind of annoyed me, but it was late and so we just went home. We get home and get her settled. We went up to my room and she gave me some presents and we chat a little bit. She then says, "Thanks for letting me stay here this semester." Huh? Excuse me? This semester? I asked her like, what do you mean? You can stay here tonight. We can see each other during the weekends if you want to hang out, but you can't stay here. She goes quiet. We go to sleep. At this point, I just wanted her to go away, and I got what I wanted. The next morning, I wake up and she's gone. I don't even know how she got out because we locked the doors at night, but she just vanished. We have special locks that you need a key for to open, and the key was somewhere else in the house. Her suitcase was still there. I tried calling her, but she didn't pick up. She eventually texted me, asking if my mother could drop off her suitcase at a train station 40 minutes away at a certain time. My mother brought the suitcase, and that was that. Never seen her or spoken to her again after that. Now that I think about it, I have a theory about why this went down like it did. She most likely put my address on her visa application as her place of residency during her stay, and needed to stay in my house in case immigration was going to check if she was actually there. When I was in high school, I met a guy from a different high school in a local chat room. We hit it off, and after a few days, we agreed to meet up at the store I worked at once I finished work. Well, I guess he showed up a little early with a friend and came through my check stand. I thought it was him since we'd swapped photos, but I was really shy and didn't want to be wrong. I waited for him to introduce himself, but he never did, and he and his friend paid for whatever they had and left without conversation. I was still hopeful that wasn't the guy, so I waited for him for an hour after my shift. Of course, he never showed, because that absolutely was the guy. He must have been disappointed when he met me in the checkout line, and instead of being a decent person and saying he wasn't interested, he just ghosted me. If I could go back in time, I definitely would have said something to him at the check stand. That's my one regret. When I was 14, I had an online friend 2 states away who was 14. He and his mom took a trip to see me, and the first thing we did when we saw each other was run full speed at one another. Our heads bounced off each other and I chipped my tooth and broke his braces. I'm pretty sure his front tooth was also loose and had to go to the dentist to fix it. A friend I had for 6 years flies over to Australia to hang with me for a month. Little did I know, he was a little bit taller than me. I was 5'10". He was, well, 6'7". I never knew he was this tall. He never talked about it. And when I was at the Brisbane airport waiting for him, I texted him stating, "I don't know where you are," to which he replied, "Look up." Towering over everyone is this blonde guy that has the arm span of the airport lobby. I cried, we laughed, and I regret bringing him over because my ceiling almost hits his head. It was my friend Kate who befriended this girl Jessica, who allowed us to come and stay with her when we traveled to the US. Jessica was rude to me instantly and kept my friend away from me. I'd go upstairs and she'd find a reason for them to go downstairs. She had Kate share her bedroom and she'd lock the door for hours, so I'd just go off and do my own thing. We met her 2 odd friends and they both ignored me. When it was time for Kate and I to move on to another state, Jessica insisted on coming with us. The lady we stayed with in another state, Robin, took no crap and called Jessica out on her strange behavior. Jessica proceeded to lock her herself in a room and demanded Kate stay in there with her. They were in there all day, and eventually Kate came out and said to me that there's something wrong with Jessica and she's actually scared. Kate and I had plans to stay with another online friend, Matt, in another state, and Jessica demanded we cancel because she doesn't like or trust Matt. We said no, this is our holiday and we've paid for our flights, and Jessica then said she'll come with us, but we can't meet up with Matt. We said no, she cried, and we left. Kate blocked her on everything. Kate's mother called us not long after saying Jessica contacted her crying, saying Kate is in danger and that we abandoned Jessica, and she's so concerned for my friend's safety. It was actually incredibly scary. Kate later found out from another girl, Jane, they all knew each other from a forum, that Jessica had been telling everyone they were in love and had even slept together. I don't know how much of that is true, but I've known Kate for 20 years now, and she's never identified as anything other than straight. She denied it 100%. Jessica was just obsessed with her. And months later, Kate heard Jessica was telling everyone she was saving money to come to our country to find Kate. She never did, thankfully. Other than the time spent with this girl, we had a great holiday and made some good friends. I, 22-year-old female, had a 26-year-old male friend online for 11 years before we met. I'm Canadian and he's American. We met on a role-playing site when we were quite literally still kids and were a massive part of one another's lives, especially during our teenage years. We spoke every day through text, on the phone, had each other on social media. We even knew and sometimes spoke to each other's family and friends in real life. He called me his light and his sister, and I called him my brother. We were family. It would take a whole novel to explain our 11-year friendship and what we'd been through together, but I'll just try to make it short by saying he had a very crappy and unstable life and had a lot of mental health problems. He was a narcissist. I spent many years being his emotional crutch and punching bag, helping him find jobs and being there for his breakdowns. I never broke off the friendship because after all those years, I kind of felt responsible for him. Anyway, last year we finally decided to meet. We were both grown adults and saved money to go on a 10-day trip to a dream destination of mine in the States. I knew this likely would not go well. I knew he was a narcissist, but I just had to meet him. I had to meet my brother, the guy that was there for over a decade. I needed to see him face to face. On this trip, he, 1, abandoned me on a mountain during a hike because he decided he wanted weed. When he came back, I was obviously mad and wanted to go back to our hotel, but he told me to wait for him in the car while he did the hike on his own. I took an Uber home and he returned as well 4 hours later. 2, automatically assumed I'd shell out $300 for him to buy a laptop he wanted without asking me. Just brought me to the store to look around while we waited for our movie to start at the theater and sprung it on me. I refused. And 3, was overall inconsiderate. We only ate at places where he wanted to eat, when he wanted to eat, only did things he wanted to do and not me, despite the trip being my idea, and I missed out on a lot because he just wanted to sit around and do nothing. And so much more. What hurt the most is when I confronted him about it, he told me, "You're not my girlfriend. I don't need your approval or need to change for you to like me." I cut the friendship off and blocked him when we returned home. I also plan on retaking my dream trip one day and doing it properly this time. When I was 19, I jumped on a flight to meet a friend I had known for about 4 or 5 months. We both went through family bereavements and were a shoulder to cry on for each other, via the phone or internet, and we just decided to meet for a few days in a country between us. Until then, everything had been perfect. She was the coolest girl, really smart, the kind of person you want to be around all the time. When we met, things started great, but a day later she confessed, "You're not what I expected." What? 19 years old and not very confident, this knocked me sideways. "I don't know, you just seem different." I never hid who I was before we met and was completely open, and it put a real sour taste on the rest of my time with her. Instead of chatting nonstop and watching Jackass on TV in the hotel at night, we went quiet and straight to sleep, ate in silence. I put as much effort as I could into it, but I still never got to the bottom of how I was different. We went our separate ways, texted for a few days, and then never spoke again. Not quite an instant regret, but there were two people I was meeting, Macy and Maya, for the purpose of this story. We discussed meeting again, planned to have sleepovers, just generally have fun. The first day we meet up went really well. We all had a good time. I thought it went brilliantly. Then, a few weeks later, I found out they were carrying out all the plans, without me. They still have sleepovers to this day when Maya's back from uni, and I'm just left out. I don't speak to either of them anymore. It hurt. The worst part was, I'd met Macy a few times before and it was fine. This all happened after I met Maya at the same time. A few months down the line, Maya confessed she had a crush on me. Don't know if that played into it, but never actually met him, but played Apex with a dude pretty regularly, almost every day. We finally exchanged info, and then he used to call me repeatedly in depressed fits and complain about how girls don't like him. It sucks because I wanted to help, but once it hit 36 calls in one day, I had to block. I actually worked with this lady at the time. She was good looking and very flirtatious. Most importantly, we both played World of Warcraft. She ended up inviting me to join her server, and of course me wanting to get closer to her, I joined. We played for a time and had a good PvP group going, her regular friends. Of course, she was still flirty with me in-game and I was back, all in group chat. Either way, we had some great times together slaying players in PvP. Summer comes and it's a company barbecue. I find out she's bringing one of our PvP partners to the event. Cool. It was her husband, a cop. I've been virtually flirting with her in-game in front of him for 3 months. In my case, he got freakishly obsessive and possessive. Met online through a fandom. After a few years, the fandom pretty much fell apart, but a handful of us stayed friends because we actually had a fair amount in common. D was very normal. The rest of the group seemed to love him. About 4 years after just being online mates, we met in person, and it went fine. We interacted a lot on social media. I had a really busy period in my life, but managed to squeeze in a Christmas get-together at my place for my little group of friends, including D. After that, my online activity decreased drastically due to being busy, and when I managed to get on Facebook, I noticed that most of the group were no longer friends with D. Weird, but whatever. I checked my messenger and saw message after message after message asking why I wasn't responding. What was I doing? Could we arrange a meetup? And things like that. I explained I was super busy and it was also coming up to the anniversary of my mom's death. So just give me some time and we'll see about meeting up another time. He said, "Oh, yeah, I forgot about the anniversary. You can have that day, but I expect a response after." Screw that. I blocked him. So he sent email after email after email asking me, "What is your problem? What do you think you're doing?" And things like that. So I blocked his email too. After 3 very peaceful weeks, there was a knock at my door. It was D, and he had a 6-page letter detailing why we had to be friends. I shut the door. I used an anonymous email thing to tell him if he contacted me again or showed up at my door, I would call the police. I went on Facebook and told everyone, including the 2 remaining mutual friends, about all of it, and could the mutuals not share anything about me and my life and actively discourage him from attempting to make contact? And the friends who had long since unfriended him started messaging me that they stopped talking to him because of how creepy he was being in PMs about me, always asking if they knew what I was doing. Had I talked to them? Was I seeing anyone? Or if I was actually busy, because he was convinced I wasn't, and things like that. In return, I told them how he'd been trying to convince me to stop being friends with them, because according to him, they were all sorts of horrible things, and that they were just incredibly jealous and hated how close he and I were. I assumed he was just butthurt because they stopped talking to him, so he was just making up a bunch of stuff about these people who had always been perfectly nice to me. One incredibly weird occurrence just before all this happened was telling me a mutual friend on Facebook that I was heading to the aquarium in London with my daughter, mutual friend also being in London that day with their daughter, and maybe we could grab a coffee and let the kids play in the park for a bit. I checked my messages later that evening and D was incredibly upset because he'd waited at Farringdon Station exit for 2 hours so he could come to the aquarium too, and I didn't show up. We didn't get off at that station, but one that was 2 stops after and closer to where we were going. I haven't heard a peep in over a year. He's apparently deleted his Facebook and Instagram and thankfully just disappeared. We met over a Dead by Daylight game. He was really charming, funny, and nice. Then he fell in love with one girl of our gaming group and they started a long-distance relationship. He even flew over to meet her in person. Turns out he's an abusive, narcissistic jerk who constantly belittled my friend. He gaslighted her and loved to play psycho games with our group. We stopped playing with him after a few weeks because he was so toxic to our group. Sadly, my friend struggled at that time and had difficulties breaking up with him. Took her several weeks to finally do it. She's so much better now. For my story, he wanted sex, I just wanted friendship. He had photos from when he was 16 as the only photos he shared. He was 24 and looked nothing like that now. So much so that I couldn't tell he was the same person as in the photos. I was barely 18 and inexperienced in the world. Money didn't impress me, but he kept trying anyway. Motorcycles terrify me, but he kept trying to up his bad boy image by telling me all about his. All in all, we were totally incompatible, but he kept trying. When I wouldn't bite, he decided I instantly hated him. That was more than 15 years ago. He's still using the same photos on meetup sites. I've called him out on it. He doesn't care. He says no one looks twice if he uses current photos. Truth is, it's his personality that sucks, not his face. I had a group of online friends for a bit, and I'm really close with my older brother, like best buds. And one day when we were playing League of Legends, I asked my brother to join after a while. I guess my brother was better at the game than me because they stopped inviting me to any games, so I was eventually separated from the group. One of them came to my state for an event and asked my brother if he wanted to go. He said yeah and then asked me. I was a bit hesitant, but after my brother insisted, I went. I did have fun, but there were moments that made me remember I'm not really in that group anymore. For mine, the lady was crazy. We met through an app that was advertised as a meet friends app and not a dating app. Well, turns out it was a dating app. However, she put in her bio that she was married with 2 kids. I put that I was in a long-term relationship and looking for friends. By the way, I'm a guy, she wasn't. So when we arranged to meet up, her husband and 2 kids were there as well as my girlfriend. Everything was going great. Hung out a few times and added each other on Facebook. Turns out she was super into the whole breastfeeding in public thing. Like, I get it. You go, girl. But she was super obsessed with it. 4 out of every 5 pics she posted to Facebook was her boob in her kid's mouth. She got angry when you looked away in public. Like, she wanted you to stare at her while she breastfed. Just got to the point that I was super uncomfortable with it and moved on. I met her after gaming with her for about a year and a half. My parents allowed me to have her visit for a weekend. Unbelievably beautiful girl. Had a lot of deep talks on the phone, were frequently flirting quite hard and stuff. She kind of was my first love interest. We went out for a drink with a few friends of mine and she started hitting on my best friend the second she saw him. Didn't even pay attention to me the whole evening. And the first thing she said the next morning was, "Let's go to his place." That really hurt.
Men of Reddit, what would be your response to a guy who suddenly starts flirting with your girl? Had a guy buy our margaritas when my girlfriend ordered them for us at the counter. I thanked him from across the restaurant. Free margaritas taste better. My friend ordered a girl's drink at the bar once. Right after the bartender handed it to her, her boyfriend walks over. So what does my friend do? He orders a drink for the boyfriend too. 5 minutes later, I look over and all 3 of them are sitting next to each other, best freaking friends. I took some notes from that guy. He didn't buy her a drink expecting something from her. He just wanted to make her happy. And when he found out that she had a boyfriend, he wanted to make him happy too. And people like him because of that. I bought a birthday party, girl celebrating her 30th, and I got a nasty look from them. One of them came up to me and threw the drink in my face, saying, "We're not gonna sleep with you over a drink." Bouncer kicked them out after the bartender clarified that I didn't say a word and was being nice. Yes, Bouncer assumed I was harassing them at first. The good news is I got free drinks for the rest of the night. Am I the only one who thinks that I have a boyfriend or assuming all men want you is very childish? My wife had a guy offer to buy her drinks, and when he said that she was married, he said something to the effect of, "Then let me buy the lucky man his drink instead." Which I thought was a great way to handle it. Get you a bar friend most of the time since the guy gets a free drink, and if he's a jealous or protective type, he will respond better because someone didn't end up buying his girl a drink. Went out with another couple, walking through the area filled with bars. We hear some guys catcalling our lady friend. Something along the lines of, "Yo, you're so hot, I would give it to you." And her boyfriend replies back, "And nothing for me?" This is the way I wish I would handle this situation, but my brain would probably be like, "What did he say? I can't hear you because it's so loud in here." I looked at the dude and said, "Sorry dude, you're not my sister's type," and then I immediately kissed my wife. We were both blonde, so people think we were related all the time. Gosh, I have to have my husband do this sometime. We used to work together and people would come in all the time asking if we were brother and sister. I'd step in and say something, not because I feel like I need to or because my wife can't handle herself, but because I know her and she likes the feeling of being looked after. I know this because she told me. That's very sweet. Just because you stand strong doesn't mean that you should always have to. It's good to know that you have backup whether it's your friends or your husband. I once let my girlfriend handle a situation like that on her own, and the thing I learned in the process is that it takes a woman a lot more work to deter an aggressive guy. As soon as I stepped in, Handsy McNoBoundaries apologized to me, not the stranger whose butt he touched and complimented. She could absolutely handle the situation on her own, and my first impulse was not to treat her like a possession some other guy was touching. But on some levels, it does feel like I'm condoning the behavior. This is very true. I was out with my ex one night walking my dogs. My ex got sidetracked and stopped to take some photos of a lizard basking on the side of the road. Not wanting my dogs to stress or spook the lizard, I told him that I was going to keep walking ahead. He said that he would catch up with me and he was about a half a block behind me. I went around the corner and two men saw and started aggressively catcalling me, making comments on my skin, body, and following me. I told them to leave me alone and I wasn't interested. They didn't care and kept at it. They completely ignored my discomfort and were starting to actually frighten me. My ex came around the corner, saw the two guys were way too close to my personal space, and asked what was going on. They immediately apologized to him and backed off, not the woman that they were actually harassing and scaring just seconds ago. They apologized to him. It's genuinely heartbreaking how much faster and easier it can be for a man to get another man to leave a woman alone, than for the same woman to get that man to leave her alone. It's worrying to me how common that can be. It is pretty sad that women do have to deal with this type of stuff on a daily basis. Nothing. She is beautiful and I get it. When she shoots them down and they keep trying is when I step in because it's harassment at that point, and that's a problem. Exactly, I had a customer invite my wife on a helicopter ride the other day, totally trying to chat her up. When he asked what she did there, she pointed at me and said, "I'm just hanging out, I'm married to him." After that, you could see him deflate like a balloon. Nothing, my wife just says, "Shh, watch this." Ask him if he's down for a three-way and make him uncomfortable. That seems dangerous if you're not actually down for a three-way. Lots of dudes out there would be perfectly happy to make a wobbly H with you and your lady. Well, that's when you tell him that he goes in the middle. I have to agree with that second comment. It is definitely a dangerous game of chicken. Sharing a lady with another man isn't my cup of tea, but I know plenty of dudes that would have absolutely no problem with it. It's like free food to them. My wife is gorgeous in my eyes, but she is incredibly hard on herself. After kids, antidepressants, and being 20 years older than when we first started dating, she doesn't always see that she's the most beautiful person to me. So when someone else starts talking to her and wants to get in her pants, I just tell her I told you so. I pinch his butt and say we're down, but he bottoms, no exceptions. She's a grown-up, she can respond to his flirting herself. I don't need to jump in and do the whole back off buddy thing. My girlfriend, who is 40, is often pretty useless in handling those situations, giving out unintentional yes signals, further aggravating the situation. She's openly and immediately accepting of compliments in general, but also somewhat blind to more subtle flirtation. So someone flirting with her can take her positive response to a compliment as a green light. It's like she can't distinguish between the friendly and flirtatious "you look hot," and acts if they're all friendly compliments. If someone touches her, she can get uncomfortable and act like it's not happening, possibly post-trauma or fight or flight freeze response, which can come off as being okay with that kind of contact. Someone aggressively tries to kiss her, she'll tend to turn her face away and laugh or giggle, but that doesn't give a clear no response, so she can come off as just being coy. She's aware that she often has no sense that a situation has hookup intent or is headed in that direction if encouraged. And also talked a good bit about this with people. Usually it'll be when something happens out of nowhere. She'll talk to people about it over a week or two trying to figure out what she missed. She'll digest their opinions and advice on what to look for and how to handle such situations in the future. But it just becomes a story that will sometimes pop up in conversation. I don't think she's improved in spotting flirtation or nipping it in the bud with a clear no sign. And her way of handling those situations for the past decade or so has been to ask people around her, including me, to watch out for her when she's in an environment where flirtation is likely. To answer the OP's question, my job is to give a clear no sign or just remove her from the situation. I'm not sure how her friends handle it because I'm not always around, but I do know of one situation where they did nothing, but I imagine it's because they thought, she's an adult, she can make her own decisions. Much like what you said, and one would generally assume until they know better. So there are people who need someone to keep an eye out for them and intervene before things get aggressive, as they have on more than one occasion for my GF. This was a great follow-up comment. I sometimes get annoyed with the "she's a big girl" comments because it assumes that women can easily handle or get out of any situation that is presented in front of them. If he's not making her uncomfortable, I don't care. She's coming home with me, our dog is at home, and she really likes him. Flirt with her too. It's a competition now. I was at a house party and my girlfriend at the time was getting hit on by a couple of guys. I walked up to her like I didn't know her and told her how good looking she was and that I wanted to kiss her. I kissed her and she wrapped her arms around me. When we stopped, I told her that I would talk to her later and just walked away. As I did, the guys hitting on her just looked at me in awe. I tell him good luck and watch her roast him. My GF is a bartender, so she's witty AF. I love it when people try hitting on her and she just shoots them down hard. Pure comedic gold. I'm glad I never did that. That cruel insult when someone isn't being offensive, but is too inexperienced to have game, yet is just trying to get someone to like them, will be remembered for a lifetime. I agree with that last comment. Men who don't have game will definitely remember every rejection they get. If a guy is being a complete douche though, feel free to knock him down a peg. If I didn't trust her, she wouldn't be my girl. Some guy giving her a confidence boost is fine with me. According to my girl, I wouldn't even be aware of flirting because I can't take a hint even if it's right in front of my face. I'd probably join the chat, then casually ask my wife what time we told the kids we'd be home. This happened to me not too long ago. My wife is nice and likes to chat people up when she's drinking. Naturally, a lot of guys think that means she's into them. We were at a concert, and I guess the guy assumed that since she talked to him, that she and I were just friends. They only spoke once or twice, but she was dancing and drinking and he had just hung around. After the concert, he came up and started in. By then, I had enough of him checking her out, so I pulled the old, "let's get out of here, I'm sure the babysitter is ready to go home," and the guy just vanished like a puff of smoke. We were both wearing our wedding rings. I would enjoy the show, or possibly be busy hitting on his wife. Did I mention that we're swingers? Swingers are always out here needing to make themselves known to the world. If she's taken by another man by simply talking or flirting, is she really my girl in the first place? I might laugh if it was particularly bold or egregious right in front of my face or something, but I never intervene unless she asks me to. She's an adult and she can decide for herself if she wants to entertain a conversation. Also, selfishly, I like to see if I can get a free drink out of it if it's occurring at the bar. My best friend is naturally drop-dead gorgeous. One night we went out and had quite a few drinks at a tap house nearby, and when we got back, I mentioned to her husband that literally every head in the room turned when she walked in, and that the bartender seemed to blush every time he talked to her. It was more for her benefit, because she doesn't realize how beautiful she is. He got pissed, like what the freak? You marry a beautiful woman and you're mad when people notice her? Makes no sense. Shake my head, dude missed a chance to hype up his wife. What's even worse, she felt guilty for it. He's actually a great husband and father. I honestly don't think he realizes what a jerk he is when he comes up with that stuff. Man, so many guys want to date a 10, but they don't want the attention that comes with it. My wife constantly gets hit on. I don't care if men hit on her. I trust her completely and have since the start. She has never given me a reason not to trust her. When we used to go out to bars together, she would get hit on. Guys would offer to buy her drinks. She would always tell them my drink of choice. After she got the drinks, she would thank them and walk away and hand me the drink. If people don't respect her boundaries, that's when I step in. We never really had any bad experiences with men hitting on her. Normally, once they see her with me, they basically just walk away. It depends on the situation. Most of the time, I think good luck, man. Hope she doesn't embarrass you. I know she's coming home with me at the end of the day. If the guy is obviously creepy or making her uncomfortable, I typically step in and make sure he gets the point. I'm not a small guy, so they usually get the idea. I don't really care for confrontation or violence, but with that said, I won't tolerate someone harassing my wife or making her feel uncomfortable. It gets a little awkward when you're a small guy. I'm not pint-sized, but I'm 5'7" and about 165 to 170. I'm not intimidating to most men. Had two offensive line-looking dudes catcalling my fiance in a bar a few years ago. She just ignored them for the first 2 times. Biggest issue was that they were out with her dad. I had to walk over and explain the situation to the 2 gentlemen and let them know that I wasn't looking for a fight, but I wasn't going to allow it to continue. Luckily, I knew the entire staff at the bar, and the bartender came over to ask if everything was good. I told told him, in pretty good Spanish, that I was fine, and if I needed help I would let him know. I'm super white. But these two dudes didn't understand a word of what I said. Definitely helped that the bartender went back to the kitchen for a few minutes afterwards. Yeah, not looking intimidating can be a problem. I'm average size-wise. I was once in a club with my girlfriend and some guys were harassing her and her friends. Now I wasn't really in a mood to deal with it, but when one of them tried to touch them, I immediately called them out. They were a bit buff and thought that they would win the fight. Bit of background, I've been doing martial arts since I was 4, and not some recreational stuff, but with actual fighting. I actually met my girlfriend there. I'm usually a pretty mellow guy, but that day wasn't great to begin with. She knew I wasn't in a good mood, and when she noticed, she immediately stood behind me and grabbed my pants and belt from behind. It was pretty effective. If push came to shove, she wouldn't have held me back, but I felt it and that was enough. It was a pretty big commotion, and one of them even tried to push me, but that's when security showed up and threw them out. I think if I would have been bigger, they would have just left earlier, but on the plus side, they were thrown out and couldn't continue harassing other girls. This is one of the main reasons I don't like clubs or being at bars too much. I'm not a drinker myself, so seeing a bunch of dudes being douchey or gross towards women isn't a fun time. If he isn't physically touching her, I would see what her reaction is. If she reciprocates, then I would leave because I just dodged a bullet. If she shoots him down, I make my presence known to prevent any potential negative reaction from the guy towards her. I challenge him to a unicycle cage match. Younger me would be confrontational. Mid-30s me would be curious to see how it goes, and if by some surprise she's into it, then she just revealed something about her and us that I really needed to know anyways. That is a statement to live by. Why would I have to respond to somebody flirting with my girl? I trust my girl. That's why she's my girl. She's an adult and more than capable of handling this sort of situation. Now, if it became too much or he was stalking or abusive or anything over the top, then you have to be dealt with. But if there's just some guy flirting with my woman, great. It validates that I'm with a very attractive, interesting woman that other people find the same. She's a big girl and I trust her. I hope you know what you're getting into, my guy. I'm telling you as a friendly warning. I dated a Marine. I was a Navy corpsman. While she liked knowing I had her back, she also liked standing up and showing guys how tall she really was without heels. Did I mention that she was a Marine? I gotta admit, seeing 3/4 of the men brush off the warning from a short Asian guy, only to find out my warning was valid, their eyes went from her bust to her overtowering them. Oh, by the way, she's 6 foot. I forgot to mention that. I didn't have to worry about her being taken. She had a thing for short Asian men. 3/4 of the men that hit on her were all macho white men. So she got off on showing them her true height. Then she would walk over to me, wrap her arms around me, evidently marking her territory, like a dragon claiming her prince, with a dangerous look in her eye. That got me off. Hey now, it's fun climbing trees. I just keep a close eye on the situation. My wife can be really nervous, but also a bit fiery, and if I see her starting to get uncomfortable or the guy becoming too much, then I'll step in. Other than that, I don't mind. It just proves what I already know. My wife is a beautiful woman. I like to sit back and enjoy the show. My wife is completely oblivious to this stuff, and then later is mortified when I point out that she was totally being flirted with. It's always a good time. I've seen a few guys try it and just feel bad for them. She generally shoves her huge ring in their face and yells at them. Once we were out with some friends and some guy tried to grab her waist. She yelled and slapped his drink right into his face. Most guys would get worked up and defend their girl. I just find it a blast to watch her go off on creepy dudes and put them in their place. She's the best and I love her to freaking death. Cheers to 9 years, my love. Nothing. It's the highest compliment to me when guys hit on my wife at a bar. I'm a 6 and my wife is an honest 8, so it really speaks to my charm if you ask me. Bonus if her drinks are on their tab. Lady of Reddit here. My fiance is a DJ at a bar that I used to work at, so I would go and hang out with him and all my old friends that still work there. I ended up sitting by myself near his DJ set and guys would come up to my table constantly. When they would ask where my boyfriend was, I would point to my fiance and give them the bro nod. They usually got the point from there. There was this one time when I was like 7 months pregnant and sitting at the high top. This kid couldn't have been more than 19. Comes up and asks me why I'm all alone and looking so sad. First off, rude, and not a great pickup line. So I smile, stand up, and turn to the side to show him my belly and say, "I'm not alone, silly." He looks dumbfounded and walks away without another word. Good times. The "so sad" is such a bad pickup line, but I can totally see my cringe younger self saying that. If you get worried because your partner gets flirted with, then either you have trust issues or your partner's the wrong partner. Because with the right one, you just trust them. And the amount of people on social media with replies with something like, well, good luck with that, buddy boy, you're getting your girl stolen, is exactly the reason why you can't find a good partner. They aren't able to judge a good person, trust them, or create a healthy relationship. And sometimes stuff will happen, but why do I get the feeling if you were able to create a healthy relationship, it would happen way less? Honestly, first, I'd probably need to let her know she was being hit on. She is not good at recognizing when a dude is into her, by her own admission. So us being us, I would probably low-key send her this exact text. You know that dude is trying to hit on you, right? Let's make him think we're serial killers. At this point, we would start totally playing into his advances, but occasionally saying things like, we can have guests over, right? Everything's sharpened. Or I can fit 15 people in my van if they're folded right and not too stiff yet. Or something like, how long do you think you can hold your breath? You know, like, against your will. We don't get out much. My girlfriend is a little out of my league. Not to say that I don't clean up nice, but she is a little out of my league. Apparently this was noticed by a guy at a party. He came up to my girlfriend and myself, and since my girlfriend was in the middle of a conversation, he started talking to me. Soon, when my girlfriend was finishing her conversation, he says to me without much preface, hey, make me look good. Now, first of all, I have no idea exactly how he expected me to make him look good, but I asked him, for this girl? This girl right here? My girlfriend? I mean, we could try, but I don't think she'll go for you. He turned pretty red, and without saying much else, he immediately turned around and left the group. I yelled out, where are you going? This isn't making you look good. My girlfriend loves when I tell that story. Is the flirting in person or via text, email, or social media? If it's in person, that can be pretty hot if you work it out right. If it's the other, then you gotta trust that they will do the right thing. Nothing other than how you respond is in your control. My wife and I don't wear rings, and a few weeks ago we were at the bar and a dude came right up to her and made his move. Gotta give the guy some props, really. She flirted back, cause that's okay for us, and he figured out soon enough that this wasn't his day. But it worked out for great fantasy talk that night, so thanks, buddy. This story reminded me of that episode of that 70s show when Fez gets used by a girl at the bar for a roleplay fantasy with her husband. First, I'd turn red with anger. Then I'd slowly stew and sweat until I had a plan formed. Next, I'd down a few shots of cheap whiskey, while my girl pestered me about what the freak was wrong with me, as I made no eye contact and said nothing, slowly gathering my rage into an irresistible force of righteous indignity. I've been here before. I said it to myself, and it never ended well. Before the night was out, one of us always regretted the choices we made that day, but so far, it hadn't been me. Some might say I'd been lucky. I'd say I was just brave. The kind of brave you get when you down a few shots of cheap whiskey. Real brave. So I step up to face my nemesis like a knight of old to defend the honor of my fair maiden by proudly and loudly stating, hey, you got a problem with me, bro? Happened more than once cause my wife is a looker and she's got some assets. The moment I press them, they see my cauliflower ear and totally back off. Those dudes are scum deliberately. They try to make weak dudes look like pushovers. The one time I played punch the face, I became the bad guy and Chad became the poor victim. Couldn't believe people got upset at me. I'd pull my pants down and do the helicopter while screaming like a deranged penguin. That'll show 'em. There's always that one guy in the group that will do the helicopter to protect his girl.
To those of you who earn a good salary in a low-stress job, what do? I'm a medical radiation technologist. I think my job is one of the least stressful. We don't work long hours like nurses and doctors, and our only main priority is to take diagnostic images of patients. But once we're done, they're taken away by porters, so we spend little time on patients. At the end of the day, when we finish our hours, we just head home and relax. I find it a relaxing job. Gets easier the better your skill set, and there's usually people to help you. This is strictly for x-rays only, not CT or MRI, of which is more stressful since you're on a schedule. I kind of like my job. I'm an operator at a nuke plant. I make up to $180K depending on how much overtime I work. If I don't work overtime, I make $140K and only work 32 to 48 hours a week. It's shift work, which can take a toll, but it's a union job and we're treated very well. It's low stress in a sense where if you can pass the monthly exams demonstrating your knowledge of nuclear plant operations, you shouldn't be concerned. But if you're not as book smart as the rest of the crew, you can have some problems passing the initial training you receive and the continuing. So, moral of the story, if you can pass the training, it's very low stress. I'm a truck driver, home every day. Just listen to music and watch the sunrise. Make about $80K. Could make much more if I put in the hours. The worst is having people complain about you existing. Just gotta have a screw 'em mentality. I wouldn't recommend truck driving to others though. It's very hard to get a good paying job. I got very lucky and had a home daily company hire me the moment I got my commercial driver's license. Long haul drivers actually make less than home daily drivers, which nobody seems to understand. Deckhand on a tugboat in New York for $385 a day. Next promotion to mate for $580 a day, and captain is $670 a day. We live in the boat and go up and down the East Coast for 2 weeks. Then we get 2 weeks off work. Most of the time we eat free food and watch satellite TV. I bring my Xbox and play a couple hours every day using my phone as a hotspot. Literally straight chilling for 2 weeks with friends. I guess my job is not low stress or high paying to most people, but it checks both boxes for me as a single 24-year-old male. I work rural EMS in Canada. My schedule is 96 hours on, followed by 96 hours off. In other words, I work 4 straight days and then get 4 days off. I live in a big city, but the town I work in is an hour and 40 minutes away. So my commute is not that terrible when you consider that I only need to make the drive once every 4 days. When I am actually at work, I can do whatever I want as long as we don't get a call. My company sets us up with a nice staff house, satellite TV, Wi-Fi, and a decent gym. I spend my days playing video games with my coworkers, there's 4 of us on a shift, watching TV or movies, cooking, eating, working out, taking a nap, and just hanging out with my coworkers. If we do get a call, we have 8 minutes to respond, so I can lounge around in pajamas all day if I want, and if I need to run an errand in town, I can usually get it done without getting more than 8 minutes away from the station. The calls can be kind of crappy, lots of highway accidents and farming accidents, but I find the really crappy ones are few and far between. Most of the calls are just driving people who don't feel well to the hospital, but I do enjoy the tough calls because they challenge me to make quick decisions and use my skills. In 96 hours, we usually average about 5 to 6 calls. However, I've literally worked 96 hours without a single call on more than one occasion. Regardless, I never take the work home with me. I make around $70,000 per year with good benefits, and there are a lot of opportunities to pick up extra shifts, which are paid at double time. In-house graphic designer for a pretty large retail company. We stay busy, but there isn't any of the stress that comes from working at an agency and having to please several different clients or worrying about getting enough work as a freelancer. I ultrasound hearts and vascular systems in a doctor's office for $35 an hour. Super laid back. If you're fast enough, half your time is free time. I manage to trade stocks, read, learn something new, and just generally keep extra time filled with something interesting. I teach English in China, 12 hours a week, roughly $2,700 US a month, and that's with almost all living expenses paid. 1 return flight a year, 3 months off a year, but I'm paid for 11 months. I know I'll never get rich, but I make way more than I could spend considering the cost of living here. I could easily save $2,000 US a month. I have plenty of time to pursue my hobbies, and even my time in the office is very relaxed as my classics are so basic. I work quality control on electrical and mechanical projects. It's simple. Read the original proposal and the 100% specifications, and don't let the subcontractors waver from them. Keep the customer happy by showing them you're all about giving them what they paid for. It has its moments where it can get pretty hectic, but 90% of the time, it's laid back and stress-free. I am noticing that quality assurance seems to be one of the main jobs on this post. I sit behind a desk and design do-it-yourself home theater and automation systems. People send in their floor plans and I put little speaker and TV images where they should install stuff. And I troubleshoot the systems over the phone too. Easiest money I've ever made. And I get paid pretty good. I'm a personal assistant for a really high-end real estate agent. First few months was stressful, constantly trying to work out how he operates. But now that I've worked it out, I get everything done in advance for him and spend most of my day just chatting with others in the office, drinking coffee, and going on Reddit. I despise working. I've always hated it. I thought I would grow out of it, but at 27, I just seem to dislike it even more. So to find a job I can be excellent at with minimum effort and stress that pays me well is a dream. I also start early and don't take lunch, so I'm home in good time to my doggo. I'm a college professor. If you find a field you love, you get to talk about your favorite thing for 15 hours a week, earn the income of a full-time job, and get several months off a year. Air quotes because you use that time for grading and prepping stuff for the next semester. And of course, you work longer than 15 hours a week. But what that work consists of varies widely. If community college, it's pretty chill, mostly meetings and waiting for students to see you. Research positions vary in responsibilities. Specialized schools could be chill or more demanding, but there's potential for the majority of your time outside the classroom to be up to you and how you spend it. I'm a senior accountant for an oil and gas company. It's kind of a small, family-operated company. The president of the company takes very good care of the employees and their families in terms of compensation, bonuses, and benefits. Unlike other larger oil and gas companies that have been hit hard in recent years, this one is still very much in the black. Make no mistake, the actual work is very busy and fast-paced. My career has advanced pretty fast here, going from knowing nothing about oil and gas industry to being one of the 3 most senior accountants here in just a few short years. Always something new to learn and skills to advance. Really, it's not just the career role itself that makes it low stress, but the place you work as well. The respect the company and people here have for each other is a rare find. Everyone loves their job, and the company is always pushing and making good on the ideal that employees are their biggest asset. Both people above and below me are highly talented, respectful, and very easy to work with. I have to work a weekend every once in a while from home just to be sure my duties are done to the best of my ability. However, for the most part, I go in at 8 a.m. and leave at 5 p.m. and my job ends there. Very flexible, can work from home or leave early, and the trust that everyone's busting their butt is a big part of that. It's my dream job. After years of crappy ones inside and outside the field after graduating college, I got really lucky. A friend of mine makes $45,000 a year in marketing. His entire job is making a newspaper/TV/internet ad saying, "Who would like to try a new product?" Sitting on his butt for several days waiting, then when people respond, he sorts them by if they should qualify or not. Guys can't test women's deodorant and things like that. That's the end of his job. Everything else is done by another group. He has hours of paid free time he uses to code and do side projects. He went to school for 8 years for math to get this job. I work data analytics. Today, I make $75K plus salary, good benefits, working Monday to Friday, 7 to 3:30, and all from home. Haven't worked a weekend or night or more than 40 hours in years. No commute, no traffic, no office drama, no dress code, no degree, no special training. Just an eye for patterns and fascination with data. Started my career 13 years ago doing outbound telemarketing for a credit card company. Nights and weekends for around $9 an hour. Basically the first job I could find with health insurance. About once a year, I looked for something that was a little bit of a stretch and moved for a raise. Mastered the job and move again. Going to school now for a degree only because my work will pay for it. I work as a landman in the oil and gas industry. While that title is sort of all-inclusive and covers a ton of different jobs, I spend most of my time researching the history of property to see who's owned it for the past 150 years and what they've done with it. Things like are there any mortgages, oil and gas leases, easements, etc. Oil and gas companies want this information so they can determine who to lease/pay when they drill for oil. All of this information is available in county courthouses, so I spend about half my time there reading old documents. The rest of the time, I'm able to work from home. It's a very chill job. I don't really have a boss, no one bothers me when I'm working, and courthouses can be almost like libraries sometimes. It's also a very rewarding job because you're sort of figuring out a puzzle and get to see something through to completion before moving on to your next project. There are sometimes deadlines and priorities, but they're never too bad for me, and I always hit them. It can also get stressful when there's no work or you have to move around, but I still think it's worth it. Generally, most people have a degree, but not always. It's very much an industry that still relies heavily on networking, and I know several people who do what I do and make great money without a degree. I've made over $100K a year for about 5 years now, and I've only been doing it for 7. I'm a petroleum geologist, 6-figure salary right out of school for a 40-hour-a-week job. It still involves some stress because of how much money rides on my educated guesses, but for the most part, us geologists love what we do and don't stress a whole lot. Just so you know, low stress doesn't always equate to low effort. Anyway, my official job title is senior producer, but it should probably be wearer of many hats. In a given day, I write, shoot, edit, and produce between 7 and 12 unique videos, along with all the associated assets, splash screens, and tie-in media. Said videos are then published to a handful of sites, after which I prepare and disseminate just over a dozen newsletters. Once that part's finished, I do back-end maintenance on a few of the pages in question, followed by some light community management. If I'm lucky, I'll get 15 minutes to rush out, grab lunch, and make my way back to the studio, after which I'll devote myself to editing the stories that our writers put together. That's followed by a focus on whatever one-off projects might be in the pipeline, which usually includes a fair amount of asset creation or adjustment, and a final look at the documentation associated with any of the above endeavors, which I'll update as necessary. When I finally leave at the end of the day, I'm exhausted. It's a lot of work, but I'm happy with the fact that I have creative control, and I'm pleased to be making something with an immediately visible end result. And most of all, I'm not bored. For me at least, there's nothing more stressful than boredom. I'm a carman. I inspect and repair freight cars. Most of the time, work is laid back and easy. Sometimes I have to work in crappy conditions like a heat wave or torrential rain or freezing temperatures. Sometimes I have to lift heavy stuff or do sustained hard labor, but those days are rare. Stress only comes when the yard is all messed up and the yardmaster wants us to magically unmess it, or when managers come snooping around to try and get you in trouble. Again, rare days. The job suits me and pays me enough to be comfortable. My schedule sucks, but they're hiring, so I'll finally have some seniority. I work for one of the world's largest board game companies. Most of my job is granting studios in other countries access to our files so they can translate them and sell them in their country's retailers and then pay us a royalty. I get to go on trips to check out their studios to make sure they're up to the job, go to a lot of game conventions, and literally am required to play games with the coworkers I love at least a couple times a week. The benefits are great, and being only 2 years out of college, the work experience and salary are good. I got my master's, and luckily enough, a friend of a friend just then needed someone who could do data analysis. So I moved to a small city in a poor state where most men graduate high school with little literacy or numeracy and end up going to work on farms or doing manual labor. I spend on average about 4 hours a day doing pretty basic calculations in Excel and get paid twice the average income for this town. It has its pros and cons. I meet tons of interesting people I wouldn't have otherwise come across, and I have a very different perspective now on what I used to consider success. But it's also lonely, and I have a hard time relating my life to those people I meet. I work midnights as a direct support professional for people with developmental disabilities. 90% of the time I'm on Reddit or drawing or watching movies. Most of the time the guys in the group home are sleeping. It doesn't pay anything amazing, but $10.25 plus benefits isn't all bad when all I have is a GED and a few hours of training. Some people couldn't do it. Too nervous around people who are definitely not neurotypical. One of the guys right now a few feet away is just rapidly rocking in a recliner as he watches TV and occasionally making noises, which I just realized would freak a lot of people out. My full job title is Export Compliance Executive at a medical device company. Sounds fancy, but in reality, a distributor asks for a document which has already been compiled by someone else. I just copy and paste. It's fantastic. I'm a program coordinator for desk operations at a large university. Essentially, I manage all of the desks in the dorms on campus. This entails lots of student employees whom I relate quite well with at my ripe old age of 22. The job is mainly email chains and meetings with an occasional difficult conversation. I get university benefits and just under $40K. To be fair, my cost of living is dirt cheap. I'm a dog walker in Los Angeles. I see the same 10 dogs every day, every week. So it's like I have 10 dogs of my own. Since my clients are dogs, they're always happy to see me, which I will never take for granted after years and years in retail. I get to be outside in the sunshine, listen to lots of podcasts, and I'm walking all day. I'm no Rockefeller, but I work part-time and it pays the bills and gives me a little extra money to play with. So I'm very grateful. I don't know if it's a good salary, but I take home about $30 an hour in tips dealing poker. My paychecks are usually $200 to $300 every other week, after benefits and taxes are paid for. You can take home over $5K a month just pitching cards to people and putting up with their whining. The job has completely worn me down after 12 years, but there's zero stress involved with it. Mine is way different than most of the other comments on here, but I make upwards of $120 a day just delivering pizza for Domino's in an incredibly affluent area of North Texas. Basically, getting paid to drive around and smoke. It's amazing. I'm an independent contract courier. My job is to drive to a list of animal hospitals, pick up blood samples, urine, stool, biopsies, etc., and then transport them to a medical laboratory for testing. I make $240 a day, just driving around in my car. I'm a medical transcriptionist. I think the pay is very good considering how stress-free and easy the job is, once you learn the lingo properly. I work in 3 shifts too, so the pay is even better. I'm self-employed, but I guess it still counts. I help small to mid-sized companies grow their business online, both strategically and operatively. The requirement is that they've already had a decent revenue stream and profit. Then, my recipe is very simple. Revamp their website, build content like blog posts and landing pages to get more organic traffic, plus buying ads, if the data shows it's profitable. The demand is so high that I've set up 4 rules. 1. There shall be no demand that I'm physically present. 2. Clients shall not tell me how many hours I need to work. They should be happy for the hours I allocate for them. 3. There shall be no deadlines. 4. I only take projects that I find fun. I can work from wherever I want, whenever I want, as long as I have some electricity and an internet connection. My clients are happy because I bring in good results that cover what they pay me. Some of my clients have internal statements saying we put our employees' well-being before business. So I never have to feel bad if I take a day off to do something I like. They rather encourage me to do it. I could easily work 300%, but I choose to work half-time. At this point, I should hire more people, and I probably will, but I enjoy my freedom a bit too much still. I recently got my job and I'm really lucky. I work for a university in admin and get about $60K a year and 17 super to respond to emails and the occasional phone call from students who need help. Sometimes it can be tricky issues, but a lot of the time I basically tell them stuff that can be found on our website, like their study dates. Or I explain how to submit forms and send their forms off to be processed. I love my job. I work in digital media marketing. I make okay money, around $80K, and work from home. Some days I'll have about 1 to 2 hours worth of work to do, but probably 2 to 3 days a week I do almost nothing. Sometimes I feel bad for how little I work compared to the credit I get, but a large part of my job is reactionary. So I figure as long as I'm there when I'm needed, then I'm earning my wage. I've also been doing this for 6 years, so I can do it with my eyes closed. I get no joy from it, but it's so easy and I work from home. So, meh. I work in swimming pool repair. I get paid by the job, not by the hour. So if I want to mess around all day, I do. If I want to make a buttload of money, I bust my butt all day. I get to make my own hours, I quote my own prices, and I knock off early for a matinee or for a beer with friends whenever I want. I average about $75K a year. I work in software quality assurance. Pays about the same as developers, unless you're on top tiers or specialized, but way less stressful. Also, the hardcore programming autistics don't enter this field since it's not actual coding, so competition for good jobs is less. Most just run or write tests and tell nerds they're doing things wrong. I'm a teacher for students who don't give a crap because their parents are rich. It's often frustrating that they don't want to learn, but then again, pretty easygoing because you can reuse old teaching plans without feeling guilty. Parents, students, and administration only get upset when I'm fed up and expect at least some of them to do their work. Currently, my contract rolls in desktop support. I'm not sure if I'm just lucky or great at my job, but nothing breaks and I only really spend 10 minutes a day total fixing things. This email won't send, that's because the email address is incorrect, that sort of stuff. I'm more here for a just-in-case scenario. It's okay, but I miss my previous roles on a service desk being hit with calls for 8 hours a day. I get in, blink, and it's time to go home because it's so full on. The days go pretty slow here and I end up exhausting Reddit by lunchtime. But for $35 an hour at 21 years old, I can't complain. I'm a garbage man. I switch between a 2-man truck and the scale house at the transfer section. I make $50K a year to dump your trash and tell you where to dump your trash. It's a town job. We're one of maybe 6 towns in Connecticut that hasn't privatized trash collection.
Men of Reddit, we all hear the horror stories about how crazy men can be when they get rejected. But what have been your crazy experiences when you reject a woman? I dated a girl for a couple of weeks, and on the 3rd date, we chilled at my place and talked. She told me that she thought men who watched spicy content were disgusting, and if you were in a relationship, it was cheating. 10 minutes later, she, out of nowhere, asked to use my computer. I knew the last thing that I had open was not going to impress her, so I said maybe some other time. She got way too angry after hearing that and said that her intention was to write me an email about how much she liked me. I call BS. When I said I thought it would be best if we called it a night and I drove her home, she went quiet until about halfway there, when she then says, "My dad's best friend is a cop and I can say what I want." I got the gist, but I figured it was an attempt to make me reconsider. I dropped her off and she started crying very loudly, fell down in her parents' driveway and crawled to the front door. Sure enough, next day I was arrested for SA, and it took a week for her to admit that she made it all up. But the charges weren't dropped for another 7 months. Dude, you should press charges and talk to a lawyer. She shouldn't get away with that. I agree, for 2 reasons. 1, every time someone makes a false SA claim, it hurts the victims who have actually been through it. And 2, I think laws should be put in place to punish those who falsely report crimes such as SA. I rejected a girl once, then about 2 or 3 months later, I was catfished by her. She was, in her words, only proving that I would end up going out with her anyways, by pretending to be somebody completely different. A police report and a restraining order later, she's out of my life. I bet she's still watching you. Beware. Wait, you were able to get a restraining order? Did she show up at your place or something? From what I've heard, it's not easy to get a restraining order. I knew someone who had to call the police on their ex several times before they gave the ex an injunction. Yeah, I'm actually shocked this person got a restraining order so easily. I've heard horror stories of women not being able to get them for their crazy male counterparts. To be fair, I was totally into this girl at first, so my rejection might have stung a little more. We were friends with benefits, and she was legitimately super attractive to me. Just as time went on, I learned more and more about her, and that made me not want to be with her. Hooking up with her, sure, but not like building a life together. So when she made the move to be more than friends with benefits, and I said no, she told me she was gonna hook up with a dude she knew I hated, film it, and send it to me. They're married now, with kids, so I mean, good on them, I guess. Dude, she's playing the long game. She's probably recorded the marriage, the birth of her kids, and will film getting old and gray with the new guy, and only then send you the final edit on her deathbed. That'll teach him. Went on one very low-key date that she asked me on, and let her know as gently as possible that I wasn't feeling it. This chick pulled all sorts of crap after that. Showing up at random places where I was, pretending it was a coincidence, calls from different numbers, making fake social media accounts to not only try to contact me, but also befriend my friends, made a lot of self-harm threats, made up friends and relatives dying, posting photos of me unaware she was nearby, made up boyfriends to try to elicit jealousy, even a fake pregnancy scare from one of said fake boyfriends. Really didn't understand how she thought this was going to sway my opinion. This sort of crap went on for a while until I moved away for unrelated reasons. This was many years ago now, and I can't even remember her name. I hope she's forgotten mine as well. Another woman pulled the "I'm pregnant" card on me after we broke up, positive test in hand and everything. Drove her to a clinic for a professional test. She wasn't, of course, but what a sick freaking tactic. Yeah, I think it needs to be known how often women use the pregnancy tactic to try and control men, to the point where they will sleep with another man to get pregnant to try and keep the man that they just cheated on. It's wild. She tried to come over to my house and scream at me from the outside. Little did she know my mom doesn't freaking play that crap, and went outside and yelled at her 20 times worse than she ever thought. As a full-grown adult, I had an ex come to my parents' house. While I was there, she had found out on Facebook because I was tagged in some posts, and I guess wanted to talk to me after I had told her that I didn't want to be with her anymore. I had blocked her number and her Facebook after a few attempts to reach me over the last 3 weeks. She showed up to my parents' place and I was helping my dad take out the trash. My mom saw her from the garage and started speed walking towards her car saying, No, get that damn car in reverse, honey." She got to her driver's side window and just started yelling that she should be ashamed to show her face around here, and to have some damn self-respect. I didn't even get towards the car before my ex started backing out. Never tried contacting me again. Thanks, Mom. You're the best. Real talk. What's with that speed walking things mom do? Because it's so goddamn terrifying when it's coming for you. When it's pointed at somebody else, it's the funniest looking way to move you've ever seen. But the second you're the target, it's more serious than a late period. And it doesn't matter if it's your mom or not. That's what I don't get. You hear any dad but your own yell and you immediately think, that's not my dad, I'm not in trouble. They could be looking right at you and yelling your name, but you're still not gonna get worried. But if that mom walk starts targeting you, doesn't matter if you've never seen this woman in your life before or not. You start mentally listing all the crap you've done recently that could get you in trouble. I can't speak on the mom walk, but the mom stare is definitely real. My friend once lied to his mom that I got caught smoking at school, which is something I still haven't done to this day, but she straightened her back, stared daggers into my soul, and just said, "You did what?" I panicked and was trying to say something while my friend was just busting out laughing. She slashed my tires when I was at work. My buddies tried to tell me to stay away because she was nutso. I decided to form my own opinion. Conclusion, she was nutso. Does after a breakup count? If so, I was graduating from my master's. I had low self-esteem and my ex was really hinting that she wanted to get married. I didn't. I was super clear on that. She broke it off right before I was about to visit my parents for about a week. I was a bit bummed on my way home and a couple of days after that. Then she called me and said that she wanted to talk when I got back. By then, I had a feeling that she would want to get back together if we got engaged or married. That's exactly what happened. When I get back, she started acting like everything was fine and talked about us getting serious. After that, I sat her down and told her that it was over. I was pissed and she was in the harmful mindset. She even ran to the kitchen and got a knife and threatened to, well, you know. I pulled the knife away from her while getting cut myself and locked her in the bathroom where there was nothing sharp. And I called a friend of mine to give us a ride so I can leave her at her house. At that point, I didn't want to leave her at a cab or act crazy or go missing or something. That's not the end of it either. It had just begun. The next morning, I woke up to 30 texts and 5 missed calls, which I decided to ignore. It escalated to 40 a day and 20 missed calls for about a week. Then notes in my car. Then a friend of hers started coming to my house to talk to me and say what went wrong and apologize for her. I told her that I was not going to get back with her. When that didn't happen, she sent over 2 of her friends to beat me up. Luckily, my friends were in my apartment and they backed off. The next morning, I had 2 slashed tires on my car. Almost missed a job interview. She would stalk me by staying at the cafe across the street from my place for hours, monitoring who came in and who came out and at what time. The final straw was after about 3 months had passed, I started dating a girl and we went to my apartment to DVD and chill. I got a call about an hour in. It was a friend of mine saying that he got a call from my ex saying that the girl with the brown hair and red blouse, exactly my new girlfriend's description, was too ugly for me and she wanted to mess her up. I ended up making my new girlfriend a nice dinner and had a bottle of wine, so I could stall for enough time for my ex to finally leave her post at the cafe. I ended up changing my car, apartment, cell phone, emails, and after that I haven't heard from her since. Man, that beat up situation sounds hilarious. I just imagine 2 guys knocking on your door, trying to be all tough and threatening you when you answer it. Then you slowly open the door and you have a bunch of friends just over watching the game. Yeah, I don't know what she expected out of that. But yeah, I opened the door and 2 guys were standing there and asked, "Are you OP?" I, of course, said yes, and the guys just started pushing and saying that I broke my ex's heart and that I should be in pain as well. Well, I started with the punches, buddies heard me and they came out, with tons of beer bottles in hand. They started to run away after a friend of mine threw one of the bottles at the floor near their feet. My bet is they saw one too many telenovelas. Kind of related, but a friend of mine stalked a boy in her class for almost 2 years and would always tell people, faculty included, how she wanted to marry him and have his kids, and keep him in her basement, etc. It was mostly joking, but her crush on him was real. Anyways, one of the teachers ratted her out, and she got hit with the threat of a restraining order by the OP if he wanted to press charges. She was mortified, but luckily he didn't want to pursue anything with the law. After that, she cooled down with the stalking. A year went by and she said that she was over him, but then decided to solicit him for a hookup via Instagram DMs, and then told everyone about how she did so. She was reported by the faculty member yet again. When are people going to realize that DMs don't stay private anymore? Then again, why did this chick go around telling everybody she did it? So a little backstory, I was in high school and found out this girl was cheating on me, so I broke up with her. She wanted to get back together, but I wasn't going to fall into that again. She texted me like once a month trying to start a conversation to get back together. I kept it to small talk for about 5 minutes each time before killing the conversation. Every time I rejected her, she would get absolutely pissed. She would badmouth me around the school. She tried convincing my friends that I was gay. She tried saying that I beat her, and the list would go on and on. Oh, and she tried convincing me that she was pregnant. She would make comments like, "You're gonna be a dad." So I went to her house on a Saturday and told her that I will pay for a test, but she got really pissed and started making excuses. Luckily, nobody ever believed her, and I graduated now, so I don't have to deal with her. She still tries to get back with me through text every now and then. There was this girl that used to hang out with most of my friends, and came at me with aroused fury. The worst event happened when we were all at my house getting wasted. At first, she was just being flirtatious, but the more she drank, the louder and more obnoxious her advances became, to the point where she was just repeating, "OP, let me get a taste of that popsicle stick." My strategy was to laugh and brush it off, hoping not to agitate whatever primal instincts were fueling that flame in her loins. Eventually, she got up from the couch, gave me this sort of determined look, and said something like, "I'm just gonna taste it." Then she started to rush over to me, when she slipped and straight face planted on the hardwood floor. The floor itself had a crawl space underneath, so the sound reverberated like a bag of bricks just being dropped. While everyone was pointing and laughing, I went and hid in my room. And for the next hour or so, I could hear her wandering around looking for me, yelling and saying weird stuff. Eventually she left, and from what I've seen on her Facebook, it looks like she quit getting wasted and is doing way better today. No more popsicle zombies. That might have been hot if she wasn't wasted. I dated this girl in high school, and she was really clingy, so I broke up with her. I came home the next day to find out that she had been calling my house every 5 minutes and hanging up. She wouldn't stop calling, even after I picked up and asked her not to do it anymore. We had to call the police. I ran into her dad a few days later, and he apologized for her bad behavior. Years later, she moved in with a friend of mine and screwed him out of a ton of money. Apparently, he was giving her money for rent and bills. However, she didn't use it for any of that. She moved out of their apartment, and when my friend got home one night, found out that he was being evicted and his girlfriend was gone. Had a girlfriend holding a knife against my chest when I tried to break up with her. Needless to say, we ended up doing the tango, and I broke up with her another day, by phone, because I wouldn't go nowhere near her with bad news. And people wonder why guys decide to break up with women over the phone or via text. Situations like this is why. Mine is pretty tame in comparison to others, but chick wanted me to ask her out to homecoming, but I had been dating my girlfriend for about 2 years, so I was obviously going to take her. She didn't like that because apparently I was in love with her just because I was nice to her and had conversations with her during English class. Anyway, she asked me and I say no. I tell her that I was going to go with my girlfriend, but she was more than welcome to come hang out with us and we would even dance with her. She got pissed and stormed off. 15 minutes later, I'm smacked in the side of the head with a plate of french fries covered in ketchup. She then proceeded to get some kid to go to the office and say that she threw them because I spit in her face. I almost got expelled because she was in tears and really selling it. Thankfully, the snack bar attendant saw everything and intervened before anything happened. She didn't get in trouble or anything, the school just acted like it was over and done with. She moved to Alaska or something after that. We really need to start punishing people for lying about stuff and trying to get other people in trouble. I was relatively good looking and popular in high school and was aware that girls liked me. One of those girls was someone I was studying with for an AP exam. She lived a couple of blocks away and would come over when I got home from baseball practice. One night we were quizzing each other and she said something to the extent of, "If you get all of them right, I'll let you kiss me." I didn't get them all right, but she told me that I could kiss her anyways. I just kind of chuckled and told her, "Nope, I have to get them all right." And we went back to studying. Later that night, she sent me an email about how she views me as more than a friend and wants to know if I felt the same way. She was a cool girl and I liked hanging out with her, but I didn't want to date her. So I told her how I valued our friendship, etc. I get that it's a cliche response, but rather than accepting it gracefully, she told our AP US history teacher I was harassing her. This history teacher was also my baseball coach. Now, if you watch American teen movies, but you didn't play sports, you probably think that my teacher/coach told me that we would speak about it later. Then we would have a good laugh about it in the locker room. If you actually played sports, you're probably aware that I was benched for the next game and spent the next couple of practices running laps around the perimeter of the field. I guess it's not really a horror story per se, but it's still a crappy thing to do because a guy turned you down. We were friends and hooked up a couple of times. I told her I didn't want to hook up with her anymore because I was interested in somebody else. We talked on and off for a bit, but never really hung out because of our history, and I didn't feel comfortable with seeing her in person, except strictly platonically. Then one day, she texted me saying that she was SA'd and that she needed someone to talk to. I call her to see if she was okay, and she was bawling her eyes out on the phone. I made an exception about not seeing her in person this time. When I was with her, she ran to me and cried in my arms for a little bit, then slowly started reaching into my pants. I told her I wasn't into that, and she went off. She started screaming about how I could reject her in her time of need, that she just needed somebody to care about her, love her, to hold her, and to touch her, etc. The real kicker though, somewhere in her rambling, she said that she completely lied about the whole thing. I dropped her off a block away from her house, told her to get the hell out of my car, and just ghosted her after that. Like I've said in this video already, we really need to get some strict laws about people lying about serious things. This is about my sister-in-law's best friend. I couldn't stand being around her. She was obnoxious, stupid, and dressed like a $10 lady of the night. My brother and sister-in-law were always planning date nights for the four of us, and then they would find a way to recede into the night so that the two of us would be alone. I was nice at first, but then her flirting went into overdrive. She was always smiling at me, caressing me, and laughing at my jokes even though I wasn't trying to be funny. I had to put the brakes on everything and become short with my answers and practically sat on my hands. I wanted to make sure I wasn't sending any signals out. After several get-togethers, she finally got the hint. Unfortunately, she couldn't handle the rejection and started bad-mouthing me to everyone with the listening ear. I was confronted several times by my family members and mutual friends about how mean I was to her. I was even told that she told someone I didn't even know that I got wasted and started grabbing her. She couldn't handle rejection like a grown-up, so she made me out to be the jerk. I was dating a girl, she was about 20 and I was about 22 at the time, and things were clearly not working out. And the only thing that kept me from ending things was that I had left my favorite John Mayer hoodie at her place and couldn't figure out how to get it back without a whole bunch of awkwardness. I decided that there was no way around it, so I called her to tell her that it wasn't working out and that we needed to end things, and that I'm coming over to get my sweatshirt, but she could leave it on her porch if she didn't want to talk to me or see me. No luck there. I pull up to her house, and she is standing in her front yard. My hoodie is laying behind her in the grass. I get out of my car, and before I can say anything, she starts yelling at me. I should mention that it was a nice mid-June evening, and many of her neighbors in this idyllic picture of suburbia were sitting on their porches and got to witness all of this. This goes on for about 13 minutes, non-stop, with her going on and on while I say nothing. Finally, she runs out of things to yell, and she is finally catching her breath. So I ask, "Can I have my hoodie back?" She throws it at me, and I bolt for the car and out of the driveway before she can start up again. The best part? My hoodie was unharmed. I'm not gonna lie, when I first read this story, I laughed when they said John Mayer hoodie. I guess his girlfriend's body wasn't a wonderland. I figured why not end the video with a personal story. I don't know if this would be considered a rejection officially, but I did date a girl for 5 years that handled the breakup pretty terribly. Like I stated, we dated for over 5 years, and I can honestly say that it should have ended 2.5 years earlier. But hey, when you're a young guy, you think more with your little head more than your big one. Well, fast forward to me finally getting the courage to break up with her. If you need to know the final straw, she kept talking to me about some work trip she was going on and how it was going to change her. And I knew what that meant. She was going to do a bunch of things that I would hate or disagree with. Once I did this, I felt a sigh of relief, but also like a dummy, I jumped right into another relationship because I thought that was a smart thing to do at the time. Well, one day, my idiot self sent a text to my ex that was meant for my new girlfriend, who my ex had no idea existed. She thought I was still single. Well, the month that followed had my ex calling my mom, telling her that she was pregnant, which made my family freak out on me. Don't worry, the baby wasn't mine, and if I remember correctly, she didn't even have a baby for another 2 years, so that was a lie. She also called my mom while my new girlfriend was at my house to inform me that she was at a crisis center because she was thinking about ending it all. Oh, and of course, since Facebook was all the rage at the time, she found my new girlfriend and decided to talk to her. That was on top of other things like she would tell me that she downed a whole bottle of Everclear, falling asleep in a bathtub full of water, and about how she destroyed her brand new car that I made a couple of payments on. Basically, she was trying to do everything she could to ruin my new relationship. I also believe she randomly showed up at my house once or twice. So it's safe to say she didn't handle things well, but to be fair, my new relationship wasn't going to last that long either anyways, because I found out that my new lady was hiding 2 kids from me and lying about them being hers.
Redditors who work in retail, what's the saddest thing someone ever returned? Customers come in regularly with large amounts of baby supply returns. They get the wrong gender items or duplicates. An older woman came in with a cartload, so I asked about the new baby. She slowly and through tears explained that her only child and grandbaby had died during childbirth. A man returned a Christmas tree one year. He was pretty bummed out, and when I asked him about it, he told me that he was supposed to have visitation this Christmas, but his ex refused to let him see his kids. I still think about that guy. I hope he gets his kids this year. I used to be a manager for the Disney store. We had a regular old man come in with his wife regularly. Super cute couple. I mean, matching outfits, holding hands, just as cute as could be. We used to sell these huge stuffed animals, like ginormous. The couple came in about once a week and would just walk around, laugh, and smile, buy little things here and there. One night, he came in on his own and bought one of these gigantic Mickeys we had. It was $300, I think. He was so excited about it. He told us all about how he was going to take her out to dinner and it would be sitting there on the bed to surprise her when they got home. Anyway, 2 days later, he walked back in carrying the giant Mickey Mouse plush to return it. He had bought it to be a surprise for her 75th birthday. She had passed away in her sleep the day before her birthday. He thanked us and said goodbye and that he would not be coming back because our store reminded him too much of his wife. We found out he passed away a week later. We found out all the details because one of our employees went to their same church. Two middle-aged ladies, apparently sisters, were having the time of their life in my department. One bought a ton of assorted housewares, including some relatively inexpensive but very distinctive-looking glass vases. We chatted throughout, and they were fun. I kept thinking about how much of a real joy it had been to deal with them. The next week, she came back to return the vases. When I asked the reason for the return, suspecting, the color/size didn't work like I expected, she embarrassedly explained that impulsive purchases were a problem in her manic states. Not a return, but I worked in a jewelry store and the saddest sale we ever had was a lay-by. Guy had this ring on lay-by for 12 months, but died in a car accident. His parents came in and picked up the ring so his girlfriend could keep it. Don't think she had any idea he was going to propose. I worked at Toys R Us in the late 90s, before there was really a separate baby store, and we sold all the cribs and clothing and such. Someone returned carts full of baby items from a registry. An older man came in on behalf of the mother because the baby was stillborn. We accepted all items at full price with no receipts and gave cash back. The family certainly didn't need hundreds of dollars in store credit. I work at a liquor store in a college town, and one night some younger guy was returning a keg barrel, only it was still half full. I jokingly asked the guy if it was a crappy party or something along those lines, and he responded with, "Yeah, it was a party for one of our friends who died the day of the party." I work at a hardware store. About a week ago, we had someone return a jack, which I think had failed and snapped shut on his arm. His forearm was completely shattered, and I think he lost his job. I work at a thrift store, and it's not exactly returning, but we get a lot of sad donations. For example, we had a recording of a father's final moments he made for his two sons. It's like 2 hours long. I listened to the whole thing. Also, there's a guy who comes in every week and donates 1 box of stuff. I asked him if he was moving one time, and he said, "No, these were my wife's, and she's passed now." I'm never asking someone why they're donating again. I was working at a large pet store in the tropical fish department. One busy weekend, a very well-dressed, rather snobby woman came in and bought 6 baby angelfish, each about the size of a dime, plus the fins. The store I worked in was inside a huge high-end shopping mall, so we had a holding service where we would bag up fish, cash the customer out, and float the fish in their bags in a warm tank until the customer had finished all their shopping and was ready to leave for home. As a matter of course, I offered to hold this lady's baby angelfish. She said she was all good and laughed. We thought nothing of it, since many of our customers come in from outside the mall just to stop at the pet store, and didn't bother visiting the rest of the mall. 4 or 5 hours later, she stormed back into the store demanding a manager and a refund. She was shaking the bag in our faces for emphasis, yelling that her gorgeous angels were all dead. On close inspection, we discovered that the silly woman had put the poor fish in her car, presumably so she didn't need to carry them while she stopped for other things or returned to the store to pick them up. Unfortunately, because it was January and the temperature outside was about minus 15 degrees Celsius, the tiny babies had frozen to death. She simply couldn't wrap her head around the idea that tropical fish cannot withstand freezing temperatures. Even when we took a tiny fish out of the bag and showed her that not only had ice formed on top of the once 84-degree Fahrenheit water, but the dime-sized fish was actually frozen stiff. Some people just shouldn't have pets. Not strictly retail or a return, but at the cinema I used to work for, someone booked an entire gold class lounge so they could propose to their girlfriend alone. This cost thousands of dollars. He had a special video made up to play after the trailers, the whole 9 yards. A day or two before the big day, he called to cancel his booking. His girlfriend had dumped him. I work in a clothing store and a gentleman came in with his wife because he had lost 80 pounds and needed new clothes because his old ones wouldn't fit, obviously. I congratulated and jested that he must be working out every day to lose that kind of weight. He replied that cancer was the cause of the weight loss and not exercise as I so jointly suggested. He understood when I apologized and still bought clothes. Jared Allen bought like 15 families Christmas at the Target I worked for. I mean, like big ticket stuff for everyone, like TV, iPad, things like that. It was something like $15,000 total. The next day, since I was the security manager, I was screamed at by 8 of those families that wanted to do returns for cash, saying I was ruining their children's Christmas. I made it to my lunch break before I comped out. This kid came in by himself and was looking for some socks or booties for his weenie dog. He was telling me about how he got her and how now her legs didn't work anymore, so he didn't want her getting hurt while dragging. He paid with a bunch of pocket change and ran out the door. A couple days later, he came back in and just handed me the socks back. I worked at a Subway for a year, and we shared the building with a jewelry store. It was a small business, and we always made a salad for the owners free of charge. One day, a customer at their store is incredibly enthusiastic about buying an engagement ring for their significant other. He told the entire Subway crew about how he met her after his mother died and that they've been seeing each other for almost 5 years. He kept saying how happy he was that he found someone who makes him truly happy, and that all the challenges in his life were necessary for him to find true love. He came back a few days later. The light from his eyes was gone. He was returning the ring. I talked to the owners later that day after he left, and apparently she broke it off with him because she fell in love with someone else. It was really sad to watch. I worked at a grocery store where someone returned a box of crackers. She said that she doesn't actually eat the crackers. She just licks the flavoring off them. This particular box didn't have enough seasoning for her, so she had licked the crackers and then brought them back. I went behind the return counter one day and saw a pair of boots with a damage slip in it. They looked fine, so I asked my coworker why she damaged them out of the system, and she said a girl died in them. Apparently, the girl's mother bought them for her when she was sick in the hospital. She died and the mother returned them. Someone returned a prescription dog food. I knew what had happened as soon as she approached the counter. Her dog passed away. He was very old and sick. She broke down in front of me. I used to work for an online retailer that sold baby items. Think baby memory books, clothing, toys, growth charts, things like that. Someone was returning a baby memory box where you can store items like their baby shoes and teeth for posterity. When I asked what was the reason for the return, she said it was because they had lost the baby. You could tell in her voice how hard that was to say. I was fresh out of college, childless, and had no idea how to react. Fortunately, that was the only time I ran into that during my time there. A set of Mr. and Mrs. pillows. She had a tan line where her engagement ring was, a black eye, and her neck in a brace. It turns out the fiancé was abusive, but he didn't show his true colors until about a month before the wedding when he thought he had her trapped. Luckily, she got out. I felt really bad for her. Not so much a return, but an old man came into the photo lab I worked at to pick up his photos. He had dropped them off months ago and he had no ticket. Turns out his house burned down and he lost everything. We helped him find the photos. All he had were photos of a gray cat sleeping or sitting by a window. He cried like a baby when he saw the photos. He was old and living alone. The only thing he cared about was that cat, and it had died in the fire. I forgot to charge him for the photos. My bad. I helped a woman 7 months pregnant and her husband pick out a whole baby set for their new baby. Stroller, crib, car seats, clothes, and everything. The stroller was a high-end model that we didn't sell many of, so it stood out to me. A month later, I saw the same stroller, car seat, and crib in the return bin. When I asked about it, my manager said that the woman and her husband were hit by a drunk driver and killed. Her mother returned the items. This happened a little over a year ago. A frail old woman came in to return an unopened box of a very expensive brand of cologne. She didn't say much past, "I need to return this." And me, being the people person I am, tried to jokingly mention, did her husband not like the brand? She sighed and said, it was his birthday present, and when I went to visit him in the hospice to give it to him, he had already passed away. I was speechless and profusely apologized and ended up talking to her about my mom passing away a few months prior to this. And we ended up crying together in the store and talking for an hour and a half. She left with a smile on her face, but the initial reaction still haunts my dreams. Not my story, but my supervisor shared a story with me about an old woman who placed a large order to redecorate her and her husband's house. We're a store that mostly sells general home items, but also have a large selection of furniture. She had selected several $1,000s worth of merchandise. A lot of it was special order, so it was being sold non-returnable. The woman ended up passing away shortly after everything was delivered, and the husband couldn't deal with all the new stuff. He wanted to keep all of their old things exactly the way they were, so my supervisor made an exception to have it all returned and refunded. Somewhat similarly, someone created a registry for their upcoming baby. They had a ton of baby stuff picked out. Unfortunately, the husband had later called in to say his wife had miscarried and the baby didn't make it. The wife was okay, but in no condition to talk on the phone. So again, my supervisor allowed everything to be returned. No questions asked. I worked at a vitamin store. The most commonly bought items were weight loss or control pills that had ephedra in them. Xenadrine and the store brand equivalent were the most popular of those, next to hydroxycut. Our store sent memos that due to recent problems with the products, we would be honoring full refunds even if the product was opened and mostly used. The people returning them were tweaked to their follicles, shaking, sputtering, saying, I can't take this stuff anymore. It's making my heart pound too fast. And I'm just like, okay, it's okay. I should add that not only was it the most popular product bought, but most commonly returned one. The return box in the back was brimmed to the top with open bottles of Xenadrine. A woman came up to the return desk with 3 shopping carts and a fistful of long receipts. She explained that she was a compulsive shopper, and that as part of her therapy, she was supposed to return everything to face how much she had been spending. It took me over an hour to ring up the hundreds of items she had, all new in box, all with receipts. When all of it was done, the bill came up to nearly $800, and a lot of the things had been bought long enough ago that they had clearances out, so her return was pennies on the dollar. Back when I had just started college, I worked at Barnes & Noble. One night, I was working a shift at the cash register, and a lady came up with a handful of books and a stuffed llama. I told her the llama was really cute, and she was like, I know, isn't it great? She checked out and walked out to her car, where her husband and son were waiting. 5 minutes later, she came back inside. She said she had to return the llama, and I expressed surprise and asked why. She said, my husband wants my son to have a more American animal, like a lion. I worked in a plus-size clothing store. I helped a woman pick out a wardrobe for a 2-week cruise that she was going on with her boyfriend of 6 months. A few weeks later, she returned all the clothes unworn. I asked her if the cruise was canceled. No, it turns out that there never was a cruise, or a relationship. This guy was dating her as a prank, and he and his buddies schemed to see what they could get the girl to believe. She thought he was in love with her and wanted to move in together soon. His parting words to her were, like anyone would really date a fat person like you. A woman came into the pet store I worked night shifts at and bought a ton of stuff for her new rat, and about 2 days later, she returned everything, including the rat. She put him in a soda box turned on the short end. He was coated in feces and urine. I took him in the back and cleaned him up, but God, I don't know if I've ever felt so bad for an animal that I really have never taken an interest to. I worked at a clothing store that was popular with teens. A spoiled tween came to the register accompanied by her mom and laid out easily $500 worth of clothing, probably around 20 plus tops, 5 pairs of jeans, a jacket, shorts, sandals, and more. As I'm ringing up this absurd amount of items, another girl, I assume the first girl's friend, joins the tween and her mom. As she approaches, I realize the friend must have recently underwent chemo. She was probably a tween as well, completely bald and frail. She approaches the girl and her mom with a single tank top. Friend, is it okay if I get this? Mom, sure, but Susan needs to put back one of her items. Daughter, no way, Mom. Profanity-laden verbal assault on her mother ensues. Mom decides to purchase $500 of clothes for the daughter, while the cancer-stricken friend returns the $10 tank top. I continue despondently ringing everything up, hating the world. I used to manage the warehouse at an electronics store, and occasionally sold stuff and did returns and whatnot. A younger guy came in, about 19 or 20, and said he just got his first real job and wanted to buy a big screen TV to celebrate his first paycheck. Sold him a good TV, did the normal testing for him, slight discount on warranty and whatnot, cause I'm cool like that. He was super happy. I packed everything up for him and helped him get it out to his hatchback, probably his parents' vehicle. A week later, I saw the TV in my warehouse with a return tag on it. I asked around a bit, but nobody really knew until our usual customer service girl came in to start our shift. What I was told was that after I sold the TV, he was on his way home when a deer jumped out in front of the car, went through the windshield, and killed him instantly. The TV was undamaged because he'd laid it down on the floor in the back, all wrapped up in bubble wrap in the box. His dad had come in to return it. I work in customer relations for a luxury car dealership. I basically get paid to interact with customers and make them feel more at ease during the buying and servicing of their vehicle. That being said, I get to know and like a lot of our customers. So one day last year around Halloween, we had a young family come in looking for an SUV, since the wife was pregnant and the husband had just gotten a huge promotion. They had a kid already that was around 4 if I remember correctly, and were actually just really cool people. I actually spent a lot of time getting to know them through their buying process and was excited to have this family get their dream car. Fast forward to this August and I see their SUV out in the parking lot. When you work at a dealership, you learn your favorite plates and cars. Or I'm a freak, both are possible. I ask around and no one in service is working with them. So I ask our sales manager, thinking they're switching into the redesigned model of the SUV. We'd talked about it when they'd originally bought their car. He gave me an uneasy look and said it was the wife's mom, and I should talk to the sales guy. Weird, but okay. I find the sales guy and he's also uneasy, but after a few minutes tells me to go to the back office and he'll fill me in. Apparently, the husband had some kind of massive breakdown and had taken it out on himself and his wife. She had just had the baby and I suppose that had stressed him out. Her mom was called when the toddler went to a neighbor and said his parents were messy and still sleeping. Basically, the mom was there to see if we could buy the vehicle back after getting everything else taken care of, which we did. For my story, I'm on the other side of the coin here. Last fall, my dad decided to finally get his hearing checked and assessed for hearing aids. He really needed them. He wanted to be able to hear his first grandbaby, my daughter, coo and babble when she was born in January. Unfortunately, the ones that worked the best for him were outside the budget he and my mom could afford. My husband and I decided Santa would gift them to him. He cried. His new ears gave him a new lease on life. He was happy, chatty, and interactive during family get-togethers because he could actually hear everyone else enough to participate. Fast forward to January and he's the happiest, most doting of grandpas. He was the first person to hold her, after my husband. Dad started feeling sick in February. He died on April 12, 2016. The baby was just 10 weeks old. My mom has been largely unable to handle things in the wake of his death. Among all of the other things that I've handled for my family, because it's just too hard on everyone else, Mom asked if I would do something with his ears. I ended up calling the hearing aid shop and asking if they knew of any donation program where someone could benefit from the use of his ears. We actually ended up donating them to an elderly woman who was having difficulty communicating with her family and couldn't afford new ears of her own. Dad would have liked that. I'd like to think that she can hear her grandbabies giggle and laugh now. I've declined the opportunity to meet her. I don't think my heart could take it. For my story, they didn't actually return anything, but we offered to return something. I work at a pet store and we do dog training. This guy got a pit bull and signed him up for one of our training packages that includes Adult Level 1, Adult Level 2, and a Good Citizen test. He finished Adult 1 and everything was great. He registered for his Level 2 class and when the day came, didn't show up. This was out of character for him, but the trainer gave him the benefit of the doubt, and since he was the only dog in the class, didn't think much of it. Turns out the 21-year-old kid had lost his life earlier that morning while his dog was around. We found out from an online news thing. Girlfriend figured something was weird when he didn't meet up with her after his training class time was over. Even though it was past the return time and he bought the package, we offered to return the unused class to the family. The girlfriend didn't want to because the owner would have wanted the dog to be trained, especially being a pit bull. One time, I helped a woman pick out some items for her elderly sick dog who had incontinence problems. He had been sick for a while, but she seemed optimistic. That morning, before she took him to the vet, he was doing much better than he had for the last few weeks. He was energetic and mobile. While I was checking her out at the register, she got a call from the vet. I stood there and watched her face crumble as the doctor told her that he had had a seizure on the exam table, and that there was nothing they could do for him. All I could do was step out of my register box and hold her while she sobbed. I'm not sure when this happened, but I want to say around 2007-2008. I worked at Hollywood Video, Blockbuster competition, as a regular hourly employee. One evening, a woman came in with a few children's movies about 3 months late. Instead of dropping the movies in the DVD drive-thru box or the walk-up return box, she came directly into the store. Visibly shaken and on the verge of tears, she apologizes for the movies being late and explains that her son had just died and that she'd forgotten to return them. My coworker and I were so floored that we offered her several free rentals, a popcorn/candy/soda pack, and a few additional credits on her account. It was definitely one of those rare times that I didn't feel like my time was a total waste at an entry-level post-high school job. A friend of mine currently works at a pretty high-end clothing store. About a couple weeks ago, he helped this girl pick out a new dress for grandma's upcoming birthday party. A couple of weeks later, she came back and exchanged the dress for a black one so she could wear it to the same grandma's upcoming funeral. I work in a pet store. We rarely get dead animal returns besides fish, but it does happen. My flaw is I get attached to some of the animals in my care, mostly if they don't sell right away and are very handleable. I'm fine when they eventually get sold. Better than living in a pet store anyways. But the worst experience was when I sold a guinea pig who was extremely sociable and loving to a nice-looking family. A few days later, they come in and I recognize them, and they're holding a small box in their hands. Their son had thrown it against the wall in a temper tantrum. Knowing I had a hand in the death of one of my favorites by selling him wrecked me for a week.
People who quit their jobs in a blaze of glory. What's your story? I used to work recording concerts for a school conservatory. Basically, students would pay a fee for the conservatory to record their concerts and put them on CD for them. I had had the job as a work study since I was a freshman, and I loved it. In the second half of my senior year, I received a call from my boss saying that I messed up on a CD and that I needed to meet with him in the studio to fix it at 4 p.m. I thought it was an odd request. Mistakes sometimes happen, but all of the employees knew how to fix them themselves, and I was the most experienced worker that they had at that point. I asked if I could just fix it earlier and submit it to the office assistant, but he insisted I come in at 4. I showed up about 15 minutes before 4 to figure out what had gone wrong. I put the CD in and immediately could hear that it was a CD of a completely different concert. That was really bizarre, but we have backups of all the audio, so I just burned another CD of the correct concert from that. As the CD was burning, my boss came in and told me that I was fired. He told me screwing up a CD that badly was unacceptable. I had never been fired before. This was the longest job I had ever had, and I was totally blindsided. To this day, I have no idea how the wrong concert ended up on that CD. The best I could figure is that the office assistant mixed up the CDs or something. But whoever's fault it was, it had a really easy problem to fix. I argued with him for a bit by telling him that I thought he was making a big mistake, and this really wasn't a huge deal. But he refused to listen. Just when I resigned myself to my fate, the newly burned CD popped out of the computer. We both looked at it for 5 seconds in silence. Then I laughed, handed it to him, and shook his hand and then walked out the door. I wasn't done though. I loved that job and I felt wronged. I was also saving up for a trip to Europe and I didn't want to have to cancel it. I had already had my tickets to Waken. Without a job or a girlfriend, I had a lot of time on my hands that semester. So I decided I would just start my own business recording students' concerts using my own equipment. I charged slightly lower fees than my former employer and put ads online and around the conservatory. I advertised that I was more experienced than anyone working at the conservatory audio, and frankly, my equipment was better as long as they weren't playing one of the big venues, especially for jazz shows. Also, instead of burning CDs, I offered my clients to just send them the audio digitally, which a lot of students preferred because they would just get it within an hour or so after the concert had ended rather than several days later. College kids are cheap, and it didn't take long before I had to hire my own assistant to keep up with all the concerts that we were recording. I probably ended up cutting the conservatory's audio department business by 20%. My former boss was livid, and he made a couple of unsuccessful attempts to shut us down. I had earned more money that semester than I probably had in my previous 3.5 years combined of working for someone else. I was just mad at myself for not doing this earlier. The only problem is, I don't feel comfortable putting that job on my resume anymore. I know that feeling. I can't use my last job as a reference either, but I'll be telling my story later on in this video. Not me, but my dad. He was a partner in a software company and they were undergoing a merger. There was a ton of confusion in the move, and one guy was trying to take advantage of the situation. He was from the other company. He fired my dad for no reason. However, my dad was really well liked at his company. So much so that many of the employees from his company walked out of the building when he left with his stuff. One guy apparently came running down to the parking lot because he realized the guy that fired my dad did not have the authority to do so. My dad put his things in the car, goes back upstairs, fires the guy who tried to fire him, and then quits. I don't know if this is a blaze of glory, but it made me feel good. I got a job in a big city. My new manager said that she wanted to give me a 2-week trial period because she just wasn't sure about me. This manager was a total B, constantly yelling, expecting us to work through lunch, work late, and come in early. Had sessions in her office about how awful we were. I was miserable and the job was hell. The Friday of the end of my trial period, my manager called me into her office. She said that she was pleasantly surprised at how good I was and that she definitely wanted to keep me on. I told her that unfortunately she had not passed my trial period and I would not be staying. When I walked out, it was the best elevator ride down to the lobby ever. People often forget that employment is a two-way street. It's always refreshing to remind them of that. When that boss said there was a trial period, my brain was like, I would have told her she's on my trial period too. Glad the OP did that in the end. I drove for about 4 hours for a job interview that was right out of grad school. Nice place, working environment seemed a little tense, but that's alright. This was an animal shelter in the Midwest. The owner asked me to clean a cage for him. I said sure, doctors have to clean out cages every once in a while. It takes about 10 seconds. Then he asked me to hang out for a second while he talked to a client. I said sure. He told me to just keep cleaning the cages. I thought he was kidding. A technician walked into the room and asked me why the cages weren't done. I shrugged. From her attitude, I gathered that he wasn't kidding about the cages. After a wait in excess of 20 minutes, I just left. Got a phone call about 5 minutes later. I didn't answer it. Wait, he was making you clean cages during a job interview? What? There are so many things wrong with that. Free labor? What a turd move. Probably just didn't want to do it themselves. It's also illegal. I was a server in a really crappy restaurant. It was owned by a husband and wife. The wife was truly in charge and responsible for actually getting almost everything done. The husband was a hot-headed jerk who would show up from time to time to kick the cook out of the kitchen to play chef himself. He was a terrible cook. His wife did her best to just keep him out of the restaurant altogether, but he was a jerk and he did as he pleased. Luckily, he was also lazy, and restauranting is work, so he wasn't there often. Anyways, one day on a slow morning, when I was the only server, he came in to cook breakfast and was just ruining everything. He was smoking a cigar in the kitchen, using way too much grease and just burning everything. Customers would order scrambled eggs and bacon. How hard is that? And he would give me a blackened mystery substance dripping with grease to bring to their table. I refused. He screamed at me within earshot of the customers and told me that he was the restaurateur, not me, so I better do as I was told. So I took that crap food to the tables. They complained and asked me to replace it while looking at me like they couldn't believe that I would bring such food to their table in the first place. I brought it back to the kitchen and Hothead couldn't believe that they didn't want it. He doesn't believe me and yells at me some more. I am not about to bring the same food out to that table, so I refuse and tell him to do it himself. As you can imagine, he did not like that very much and he let me know very loudly. But he did take the food out to them. They gave him the same response they gave me, and he shouted at them. He shouted a whole rant at them about how they had no idea what food was, and that he grew up in Greece where food was an art. And he went to school and owned a restaurant, so what credentials could they have? Who are they to question food? He told them this restaurant was only for people who truly appreciated food and that they could go eat elsewhere. They did leave in silence. I think they were too shocked at what had just happened to come up with a rebuttal. When he came back from his incident with them, he told me that I was on thin ice and he didn't care for the backtalk I had given him. He said if I didn't like how he runs things, I should just leave. I was the only server in that place, and I was so pissed off I couldn't see straight, and he had just told me to leave if I didn't like how he operated. Well, I didn't like how he operated, so I left. He must have not realized that there were no other servers, because I immediately got a voicemail about how it was all a misunderstanding and I should come back because they were busy. How they were busy, I don't know, and everything would be all right. Luckily, I was working 2 jobs at the time, so I had the option to just pick up more hours at my other job. I didn't answer his calls until hours later when the voicemail started sounding really desperate. All I said was I can't talk because I was working my other job and I'm not coming back, so stop calling. I heard from ex-coworkers that his wife came in shortly thereafter, cried uncontrollably, and closed the place down for the rest of the day. That did make me feel bad because she was a nice lady who worked really hard, and I can only imagine how hard it was to try and run a restaurant with a husband like that. If that man is like that in public, I would hate to see how he is in private. I feel bad for that wife. I was an investigative reporter in Cleveland and had turned in a solid story about State Senator Kevin McLaughlin using his campaign finance money to buy Ohio State game tickets and hotel rooms for his mistress. It was approved by the editor and publisher, but the CEO, Matt Haggerty, spiked it when Coughlin threatened a lawsuit. I told him to go screw himself on the conference call with his people, before security escorted me out of the building. I sent the spike story to everyone in my Rolodex. It circulated the state house, and a couple of weeks later, Coughlin dropped out of the race for governor. I sued the paper and Coughlin for wrongful termination. Coughlin agreed that he never had grounds for a lawsuit, and I settled with the company. Slate and a few other publications wrote about my graceful exit. 10 out of 10 would tell him to screw himself again. This is the reason why we need journalists. They tend to get a bad rap, but who else watches the watchers? One of my first jobs was part-time at some small-budget supermarket. The boss was a wanker of severely limited intelligence, assigning me far more shifts than I agreed to and spending the entire day shouting at everybody, rather than doing actual work. Turns out I was also getting €1 less per than agreed upon. I noticed that after a month when I finally got my first paycheck. Not cool. Grounds enough for me to terminate my work contract with immediate effect. So I got myself a new job, typed out my notice, put it in my coat pocket, and waited for the worst possible moment to quit. The moment came 2 weeks later. My boss and I were opening on a Saturday, and it just so happened that the cashier that was supposed to come in an hour later called in sick. He tells me and goes off on a tirade about how the shift is going to be hell with just the 2 of us. I smile, hand in my notice, and stroll out of the store without saying a word. Best feeling ever. Was working as a busser at Outback in college, animation major. Was there roughly 6 months. Never called out, always came in when asked to. Finals were coming up and I was slightly behind on my final project. Called the manager 3 days in advance. I needed a day off I was scheduled for. Told me I had to get it covered. No problem. I called all the other bidders and even 2 hostesses. No one could or would do it. Called the boss back. His response, and I quote, "You need to decide right now what's more important, school or your career." I exploded on the guy with the easiest decision I've ever made in my life. I never understood the school versus career comment. Are people stupid enough to think people just go to college for fun and are not trying to get a better career? Not a blaze, more like a slow burn. Used to be a Comcast tech, put in my 2 weeks notice and got as many parking tickets as I could. The tickets couldn't be pegged to me because I don't own the vehicle. Comcast has a policy that employees need to pay their own parking tickets, but by the time Comcast got the tickets in the mail, I wouldn't have been an employee anymore. And you know the phenomenon where work vehicles can park wherever they want and not get a ticket? That doesn't apply to vehicles that say Comcast on the side. I still imagine the curses made in my name after they uncovered the extent of my evil plot. Wasn't me, but I was a department supervisor at a Best Buy for a while back in the early 2000s. We had 10 rows of various software. The store manager always had this one employee rearrange the planogram each week. It sucked. The dude had enough. He farted into the overhead intercom, shouted, "Eat my junk!" and shoulder blocked the software rack to the ground. Knowing I was going to have to clean it up, I was never more pissed at a person. Looking back, never more impressed. Bumped into him last year at the same Best Buy. He smiled and said, "Looks like they stopped selling software." I'm not gonna lie, the farting into the overhead comm got me. I worked at a technical support call center for almost a decade. The average burnout time or turnover was in 6 months. I was sitting in a meeting. They were ragging on us for sending out too many boxes. The week previously, we were sitting in the exact same room being ragged on for not sending enough boxes. I had a rough year, and I was just sitting there dying inside. I had this sudden epiphany. Every day since I walked into the door of that place was worse than the last. There was literally no reason for me to be there. That thought had just popped into my head like a light bulb went off. I got up in the middle of the meeting and just walked out without a word. The SDM that was giving the meeting just had their mouth hung open. He wasn't used to the drones doing things like this. He started after me and I ignored him. I went back to my desk and gathered up some things, gave a few other things to some people, and gave a goodbye email. The whole time the SDM was getting more and more agitated trying to talk to me, eventually yelling. I just ignored him like a bad smell at a dinner party. So I just went home. They called and called for days. Eventually, a supervisor that had me on Facebook messaged me. He was an okay dude, and I told him flatly that I was not returning. He said that we had a lot of paperwork to do and an exit interview and so on. I said no, I wasn't going back on that floor. I wasn't going to sit in an office like a bad teenager in the principal's office. It was over. I was done. We finally agreed to meet downstairs in an empty cubicle. I flatly didn't agree to anything, didn't sign anything, and just gathered whatever stuff they had for me and I left. For near a decade, they dictated everything in my life. My sleep schedule, my family life, holidays. They went so far as to time the seconds of how long I was in the bathroom during the day. That was all over. They had no more control over me, and I enjoyed making that clear. A call center is the worst job I've ever had, and I worked as a plumber one summer. Why not end this video with a personal story? Because I made sure that the people at my old job would remember me quitting. So first, I have to give you a little backstory. I worked at my old job for 8 years. It was a full-time gig at an automotive plant where we did a lot of testing on different vehicle parts. It was a place with a lot of lifers. They like to complain about how young people didn't want to work anymore because the job also had a lot of turnover. But if you were like me, someone who could be counted on, came in on their days off, and actually did their job well, you had a lot of freedom at the company. Well, after I learned how the politics of the whole company worked, I quickly became known as the guy that would speak up about problems in the workplace. A lot of those lifers would just say that I was complaining and I didn't want to do the job. Well, I didn't hear those same people complaining when I pointed out that the whole company wasn't paying overtime correctly for the last 2 years, and magically, everyone just got crazy overtime checks to fix the mistake. I guess I'm just lazy though. The job was mostly boring and I often dreaded going to work. But I stayed at the job so long because it was easy, the pay was good, and I just started taking my laptop to work to edit my YouTube videos. Since I was counted on so much during my shift, I was given a lead position and I worked directly with supervisors to make sure we took care of all the necessary problems. Well, after some drama in the workplace, we had a new shift manager that oversaw all 3 shifts, who was also a lifer. We will call them Billy Bob, and I have to say, dude was pretty cool until he wasn't. You see, one day, I was going to go on vacation and I noticed that there wasn't going to be a lead operator in charge while I was gone. So I said to Billy Bob, yo, I have scheduled vacation next week and there isn't a lead for the shift scheduled, so you're gonna have to figure that out. There was no aggression or sinister tone behind those words or anything. But I do remember him giving me this weird look, which I thought was odd because I was just letting my boss know that there was something that needed to be solved or there might be problems later. I should also mention that I was taking this vacation to burn my personal days because I was on the verge of quitting that job. I, for many years, wanted to make the leap into content creation full time, and I felt like the job was holding me back. Plus, my job also had this dumb rule of, if you don't use it, you lose it, when it came to vacation time, so I wasn't going to give them free days after working all those years. Well, when I returned from my vacation, I had officially made up my mind that I was going to put in my 2 weeks, and I told this to my shift lead, and he was like, are you serious? Because that saves me from having to have a talk with you. I was like, for what? Well, apparently you pissed off Billy Bob before you left by saying he needs to figure something out. And he went straight to HR and tried to find some dirt on you. Then he went and pulled all of your time cards and said that he found some issues. So now you have a meeting scheduled on Monday with HR, him, and other management. Are you serious? That's petty as hell. But you know what? Tell them I'm down for the meeting. I can't wait. By the way, those issues they found were that I wasn't working full-time hours because this was during COVID and they cut our hours down to 32 hours a week and specifically said that people could leave if it was slow and we had coverage. So I left a lot with my boss's approval. Anyways, what I need to let you guys and gals know is I can be really cool to work with. As long as you do your job and you don't make my job harder, we will be best friends. But the moment you try to screw me over, I will become your worst enemy. When you have worked at a place for 8 years with a bunch of dudes that like to gossip more than a high school cheerleading squad, you get a lot of dirt on people that you work with, and I had a lot of dirt on this shift manager. So when word got around that I was quitting and that I was happily waiting for this HR meeting because I had a few things to bring up, well, after that was known, the HR meeting magically disappeared. Well, he's quitting in 2 weeks anyways, so why even bother meeting with him? Now, I don't know about y'all, but if I had an employee that was abusing their time cards, I wouldn't want them to stick around at the company any longer than they needed to be. But hey, that's just me. So since I didn't get a chance to get my revenge, I decided why not make the day I quit memorable. So over the next few days, I hatched a plan to make sure that I left my mark on this job that I had spent almost a decade at. First off, with TikTok being all the rage, I decided to make a video that I would upload the day I quit. Secondly, I wanted to leave something behind that would have people be reminded of me when I'm long gone. So I made some stupid meme stickers that I hid all around the campus of my work. Each sticker had me doing some kind of dumb expression. For example, I made this stupid one that said, "This clock needs new batteries, or you just learned that time moves slower here," which was obviously hid behind a time clock that I stared at for years. Another one said, "Hey, stop peeing back here." And I hid that outside because we once had a problem where workers were pissing on company property instead of in the bathrooms. But my favorite of the 5 stickers that I made said this: "What are you doing down here? Looking for a raise?" And I stuck it right under my shift manager's desk. Lastly, I planned not to finish out my 2 weeks. Our pay period ended on Saturday and I decided, you know what, I think I'll leave on Saturday instead of working another week. So on my final day, I texted my shift lead and my shift manager that today was going to be my last day, and I made sure to use the words, "You don't have a lead for tomorrow, so you're gonna have to figure that out." And I just left my job. Oh, and that TikTok that I mentioned, it was of me going around my whole workplace flipping off every camera that they had installed on campus. I even got in a golf cart and drove around the building to hit all the outside cameras. Last time I checked, that video had like 70,000 views on TikTok, and the day following my graceful exit from the company, I had a lot of people texting me that they saw it, and one particular manager wasn't happy, on top of needing to scramble to find some coverage when I decided to quit on the weekend. My friend also told me that upper management blocked anyone from seeing the cameras because they didn't want anyone knowing what I did on campus. Oh, and to my knowledge, only 3 of the 5 stickers I hid have been found 2 years later. All in all, I can say that I've never been happier since I quit that place.
Pawn shop owners, what was the best reaction you've seen from someone that tried to sell you something that was completely worthless? Having worked at a pawn shop before, I can say there are plenty of amazing stories of customers and their antics. Usually the best stories revolve around jewelry. This one woman came in with a big gold-colored ring and wanted to get a few $100s for it. Picking it up and looking at it, I could tell it was super fake, and I tried to explain that to her. She wouldn't buy it because the street vendor told me it was solid 14 karat. I went and picked up our huge earth magnet and put it near the ring, and it shot right to it. I explained that solid gold is not magnetic. She was stunned and couldn't believe that she had spent like $200 for it. I own a similar store. People still think their Beanie Babies have value. People also tend to think what items sell for online are what they'll sell for at the same price and speed locally. I worked in a pawn shop for a couple of years. The most memorable one was about 30 seconds. Large, sweaty man walks in with a belt sander, sets it down on the counter in front of me and plugs it right in. Made direct eye contact and switched it on. The sander immediately made a loud popping sound and smoke began to rise. Unplugged it, turned around and walked out without a single word between us. For a second, I thought he was just gonna walk in and sand the countertop. I worked in a small pawn shop for about 3 years, and my personal favorite was a greasy guy came in and dumped out a garbage bag of broken computer fans and a few assorted computer parts. We laughed for a few minutes and realized this guy was serious. My boss asked him how much he wanted for it all, and the guy said he didn't know how much it would be worth, but he heard there was gold in computer parts. We had to break it to the guy that the plastic computer fans had no gold in them, but we can check out the other parts. My boss gave him $5 for his trouble. 20 plus years of owning one, and I can spot fake gold without touching it. People never believe the chain they bought from the guy at the gas station for $50 isn't real. Never. Seeing people's reaction to this varies from they knew it to I'm gonna kill him. Not an owner, but I am a frequent shopper. I saw a meathead couple try and sell their off-brand wires-cut 20-inch car stereo speakers for $200. When the guy wouldn't bite, they flipped out, yelling, "You legally have to buy anything." They threw such a tantrum he called the cops. They got arrested. Car got searched, and wouldn't you know it, substances were found. Afterward, I got a good deal on some cordless power tools. I worked in one for a few years. Not really a best reaction, but a girl came in already in tears holding an engagement ring. Everyone at the pawn shop feels obliged to tell you why they're selling/pawning, and she told me she'd recently moved across the country and just found out that her fiance had married her friend back home. The big problem was I could tell it was fake as she was walking in the door. All I could tell her was, if you thought he was a jerk before you came in here, you're not gonna like what I'm about to tell you. Ended up giving her $5 for a worthless ring just to give her something. And she ended up a bit happier, cause now she had something new to hate him for and couldn't wait to tell him. My great uncle owns a pawn shop, and some of the crap there is hilarious or heartbreaking. People try to sell free old TVs they got on Craigslist for hundreds of dollars because now they're vintage, obviously rented instruments for their kids' band class that have tags on them from the rental place. And boy, do people get peeved about engagement rings. He literally has a bag of engagement rings. They're so easy to come by. Women tend to be sad when they find out they get almost nothing or that they're fake. Men tend to get aggressive, enough that he is my cousin up front. Watch out extra careful when he tells a dude he can't really pay much of anything for what the dude thought was an investment ring. And some of the excuses people make when stuff is obviously stolen are just horrible, especially if he asks if they can prove they're the owner of the item. On the other hand, if someone's trying to sell their wedding ring, especially if it's a lady with kids, he's been known to just give them $50 and send them on their way. My cousin who works with him has a stack of brochures for drug and alcohol treatment resources and stuff like that she gives out regularly. I have one here that's the opposite. Girls thought they had worthless cards that ended up being very worthwhile. I worked in a comic book shop that also sold trading cards. In this case, Magic the Gathering. Two young girls came in, maybe 14 and 15 years old, with a small box of cards. They said they found it in their uncle's closet that passed. They figured it wasn't worth much, but just wanted to see. I thought the same, and opened up the box of cards to take a quick glance, and I was a little alarmed at what I saw. Alpha and Beta cards, a couple of Power 9 cards, and this was just the first 10 cards in. I stopped, said, "I'm really sorry, but I'm not familiar with these older cards." I lied. I just wasn't authorized to try and buy something of this magnitude. I'll need to call the store owner. I called him, and at first he was annoyed because the other store he was visiting had a Ford plow through the front window. He just said not to bother with the trade-in, until I casually mentioned some of the cards there in the stack. He said, "Don't let those cards leave the building, I'm on my way," and hung up. The girls couldn't wait, and I asked if they wouldn't mind leaving the cards with me, along with their names and phone numbers, and we could get back to them. When the owner came in, he went to the back, got some gloves, and went through all the cards. I stayed after my shift because I wanted to see it unfold. The owner gained like 10,000 respect points from me when the girls and an older woman, presumably someone's mother, came back in, and he was straight with them. He said, "What you have here is all very worthwhile. There isn't a card in this box that would sell for less than about $5. But these cards here," he fanned out some cards that I couldn't see, "are the most valuable cards in the box. And this one," he pulled a card away, "would sell for the price of these and the entire box at least twice as much. I don't have enough money to be able to make you a fair offer. What you have here is easily worth about $20,000 to a collector." The girls' mouths dropped open. The owner offered them everything he had available in the shop, about $6,000, and they accepted. Not a pawn shop, but I used to work in a mobile electronics store. Alarms, cruise controls, stereos, things like that. Had a guy come in with a box full of outdated high-end stereo equipment. Head unit, EQ, preamp, 3 amplifiers, and some nice crossovers. I told him that most of it was worthless to me, but offered him $40 cash or $65 store credit. He flipped out and began a rant about how all his stuff cost over $2,000 when he bought it. Yeah, 16 years ago. I calmly explained explained that he may be able to get more for it on eBay or something, but I have to make a profit, so I can't offer much. I also explained I wouldn't have offered anything if I wasn't personally interested in the crossovers. He slammed everything back into the box and stomped out while calling us every name in the book. As he was walking out of the door, he looked back over his shoulder, yelled something, and flipped us off. This is where he messed up. Since he wasn't looking where he was stepping, he tripped over the curb and spilled the entire box of gear into a huge puddle. A very deep pothole full of rain. It was hard not to stick my head out of the door and bellow aloud, "Ha!" I was a pawnbroker for a while. So many junkies trying to sell fake jewelry. But this one lady really stood out. She came in with a chain and pendant in a cute little box. First thing we do is look for marking. While I was doing that, she started getting feisty, yelling at me saying, "Why are you doing that? Don't you see it says made in Italy? Hey, stop! Are you blind?" At this point, I'm like, okay lady, we can't take this. It's not real gold. And she just flips out saying, it doesn't matter, it's from Italy and this and that. She called me stupid and flipped off all the staff. All we did was laugh. But as she revved off, she hit a BMW and the owner saw her. We turned over the security taping to the cops. Screw that lady. I worked in a buy, sell, and trade video game store. Day after day, people would come in with common Atari stuff, PS2 Rock Band guitars and drum sets, throwaway original Xbox or PlayStation 1 games, Superman 64, yada yada yada. They'd be so happy and excited, and I had to be the one to break it to them that they weren't going to get hundreds of dollars for their crap. But I spent $60 on it when it was new. We've taken really good care of it. We've never even used it. It's for the N64. Isn't that vintage? What do you mean a third-party Xbox controller isn't worth the trade-in price for a Microsoft brand one? They're the same thing. Day in and day out. I had a woman who threw a complete fit that we wouldn't take her Wii Rock Band drum set and 2 guitars. She also had 25 DVDs, an original Xbox and a Wii, neither of which could read discs, and about 30 bottom shelf games. All of the discs were scratched to oblivion, and everything reeked of cigarette smoke and was yellow. When I told her that the only things we could take were the 2 controllers that came with the Xbox, she yelled, threw the box of DVDs on the floor, and proceeded to rearrange games on our shelves as she stormed out. The man she was with just picked everything up and they left. They tried going to our second location, but we called them and let them know what happened. They got the same deal there and she threw the same fit. That's the problem with running a local video game store. Most people think they have a secret gold mine when they just have run-of-the-mill crap. I buy and repair typewriters. It's an odd niche hobby of mine more than anything. Typewriters can go for a lot of money, but most aren't honestly worth what people want. 85% of typewriters are worth no more than $125 in pristine condition. A lot of people will try to sell their inherited typewriters for $50 to $1,000 more than they're worth in some cases. I've seen one person try to sell a typewriter to me for $650 because he saw one online for $700 in a different color. I had bought the exact same typewriter 3 days before for $63. One typewriter, several people were all trying to sell them for $150 to $250. I bought one in amazing condition, better than the higher priced ones for $70. Just because someone labels a price or because it's old doesn't mean it's worth that price or value. That's not how it works. I had this old fellow try to sell me a tribal wooden African figure in a grass skirt. You know the type. When I told him it was worthless, he tried to convince me that the skirt was made out of real lion's mane. When I inevitably shot him down and called his bluff, he pulled a Bic lighter out of his pocket. "Do you want to buy this instead then?" I used to work at a pawn shop. One time, a guy came in with a DVD VCR combo, brand new in the box. We, the pawn shop employees, would always engage the customer in conversation while looking at the item, partly to feel out the customer and see if they had any inconsistencies in their story that may indicate stolen goods. So I started the conversation. "Wow, this is a nice unit. Where'd you get it?" "Best Buy. Just bought it a couple days ago." "Oh, nice. But you want to sell it to us? Why not just return it to Best Buy?" "Oh, yeah. I can't find the receipt, but I bought it right down the street at the Best Buy, like 2 blocks from here." While we talk, I'm pulling the unit out of the box and checking the cables and remote, looking on the bottom for a serial number. As I flip the bottom of the unit towards me, I see that it has a giant sticker on it that says, "Property of Rent-A-Center, do not buy or sell." I didn't say a word to him. My boss was watching over my shoulder. As soon as my boss saw the sticker, he pulled out a Polaroid camera, snapped the guy's picture, cussed him out, and practically threw the DVD VCR at the guy. I sent a fax to the other pawn shops in town to give them a heads up. I currently work at a pawn shop. People think silver is worth a lot more than it is. I get people thinking they'll get $400 for a chain that's maybe worth $30. Other than that, collectibles and memorabilia disappoints most people. I worked at Sam Ash for a long while. You can sell instruments there, not exactly a pawn shop, but the same concept. Guy walks in with two very nice, obviously handmade boutique basses. One is left-handed, one is right-handed. Obviously, a red flag that a novice wouldn't even think about. "Hey, I want to sell my basses." Okay, any particular reason? "I don't play them anymore." I see. Just couldn't decide if you were left or right-handed? He wants $700 for both. Looking at them, I figured they were $3 to $4K each. Problem was, they didn't have a name, just a logo. Lots of Googling later and we have a brand. Call the builder up and his warehouse was robbed weeks before. Police are called, guy's arrested, and builder gets his bases back. Not a pawn shop owner, but used to work at an art gallery that sold some local stuff. A guy brought in some rare prints by a local artist a couple towns over. These limited editions were super rare and valuable. He kept insisting. I stayed as polite as possible until I finally had to show him the exact same prints in the clearance bin at about 1/10 the price he was asking for. Not a pawn shop owner, but I went to buy a few tools from one. I was in line and in front of me was a tweaker that was having a meltdown after finding out her grandmother's ring wasn't really that valuable. It was gold-plated and had a small fake diamond. The pawn shop owner offered her $5. She stood there trying to haggle for $7. He stood firm on his $5 and she continued to flip out. I told her I'd give her $10 just to get the heck out of my way. She grabbed her ring and told me to screw off and stormed out. Me and the shop owner had a good laugh, and he knocked off $5 for my inconvenience. Former private security and my partner used to work security for a pawn shop. A Navajo man once arrived at his place with a trailer full of landscaping equipment. It looked exactly like what you see residential landscaping companies use. Full of shovels, mowers, blowers, enough equipment for a 3 to 5 person crew. He wanted to sell everything at once, trailer included. The owner said, "Let's inventory everything. Give me 24 hours to add this up and I'll call you." The owner takes a notebook and writes everything down. Every item and what serial numbers he could get. Writes down the plates on the trailer and took a quick picture of a miscellaneous sticker on the hitch. He calls the police. The trailer was reported stolen that day. Him and a detective picked a time that was convenient. Owner calls the guy back and says, "I'll give you $4K for everything." And they argue over the phone and he gives up and says he'll pay $7K for all the equipment. Just come Tuesday at this time. The guy shows up and one detective and 2 officers arrested him. The arrest was calm and without incident of any kind. The guy knew the jig was up. The actual value of the equipment? Like under 1K tops. It was heavily used, very old lawn equipment. I'm sure it worked great for whoever it was, but it was all super old equipment with little value. I worked in a pawn shop for 3 years in North Carolina. I had a couple of stoned/drunk guys come in on a Saturday, just as I was trying to close. One staggered up to the counter and pulled a box out of a plastic grocery bag. "You're not gonna believe this, man. I have a collector's item worth $1,000. He was correct, at least about the first part. He proceeded to sit a Galadriel doll from the Lord of the Rings movie on the counter. As usual, I pull up eBay to find many for sale in the $10 to $20 range. I turned the screen to show him and he flew into a rage. He jerked out his flip phone and dialed someone and proceeded to spit/scream into the phone. "Where did you see this doll for $1,000? Then turns and spits and screams at me, "Go to Google! Go to Google!" I wasn't even mad. Okay, well, I guess it's time for my most embarrassing moment. I got scammed by one of those stereo vans that goes around with equipment saying they had extra, but really it's fake. I went to the bar and my hat got stolen. I really liked that hat, so I went to the store to buy another one. As I was walking in, this van pulls up and these 2 dudes are like, "Hey, wanna buy a stereo?" I'm like, "Nah, I'm cool." They were really persistent. It also just so happened that I had an extra $100 in my pocket. They kept pushing. Originally originally trying to sell it for like $400. They said it was their last stereo and I told them I only had 100. Honestly, I bought it because I not only wanted them to get out of my face, but I also thought it was a cool deal. Fast forward to me getting home and never opening the product. I swear to God, it sat in my living room for like 6 months. Finally, one day, I needed a little extra cash, and I'm like, why don't I just sell the speakers? I drive around to 4 different pawn shops who all tell me they couldn't take it. No explanation why. Finally, I have this Hispanic lady who barely speaks English at a pawn shop offer me $40. I kept haggling on the price, so finally she got her manager. When the manager came over, he Googled the product and turns out it's a known fake product that's sold all around. The guy thought I was trying to get one over on him. I explained myself and left before the cops got called. I was a little worried. It didn't hit me until later that night why I was getting such weird facial expressions from the other pawn shops I went to. I still cringe at that story. Worked at a GameStop near a Target. Target employee calls me and tells me a list of games that were just stolen from the store. Lo and behold, not 2 minutes later, a couple walks in to sell us the games. The funny part, they were still shrink wrapped with the Target price tag and the locked plastic outer device. I noticed a police car drive to the front of the Target, so I sent my coworker over to grab the cop and I expertly kept the attention of the 2 idiots. Engaged them in a bunch of small talk, and as the cop was about to walk in, I said, "Looks like someone's here to see you." Their faces were priceless. I worked at a shop for 12 years. One of the most common scenarios is when a relative ignorantly thinks or flat out lies about something they hand down. Guns are one of the most common. My grandpa took this off a Nazi in World War II. The rifle in question being a 1950s Mosin with Century Arms import marks from the 1980s. Tons of antique silverware from the 1800s that was made in the 1960s that is nickel silver, worth nothing at all. And countless medieval swords that were made in China that they want $500 for, that you can buy in a catalog for $29.99. Not an owner, but used to work in one owned by my dad's cousin. Some lady walked in and we examined her jewelry, which we determined was fake gold. So she walked away mad, and I guess she threw it in the trash can by the exit. Later that same day, we see a man walk in that seems to be just looking around. And after a few minutes, he goes to the counter and shares a story about how his grandmother passed away and left him some jewelry which was passed down through many generations. But the times were tough, so he wanted to pawn the jewelry temporarily until he'd be able to get some more money. So we tell him, sure, we can take a look at it, when he pulls out the exact same jewelry the lady had earlier that day. But not to anger him, we test it with a magnet just to show him that it isn't real gold. He then gets very angry, saying that it is real gold and that it's a 50-carat rare gold from the 1700s, and that's why it's magnetic. For anyone who knows about gold, 1. Real gold isn't magnetic. 2. The purest form of gold is 24 karat. We explain that to him and he gets mad and pulls out a knife and starts trying to break our bulletproof glass with a cheap looking knife. And as a result, breaks it. After that, he just walks out and we never saw him again. While closing up, we checked the trash can and the jewelry the lady threw out was nowhere to be found. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description as well. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.